What's up champs, Synthwave here. The day is finally upon us, and in celebration of Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster releasing, I've spent the last 2 years looking back and reviewing every previous entry in the series in preparation for this day. I totally didn't just get insanely lucky. So join me as I literally travel through time and 3 different microphones, while covering every Dead Rising released over the years. Hey guys, Synthwave here. Long time no see, or short time depending on if I get my upload schedule on track. How have things been for you? Good? Great. They're not going so great for me as you can see. Apparently, there's a zombie outbreak here, and I'm stuck inside of the shopping mall until the military arrives. I would have been fine stocking up and waiting it out, but apparently waking up an hour too late and going to the store means that starving to death is the only option. Luckily for me, nobody's bothered to touch the American food aisle, so I'll be feasting on uncooked boxes of Kraft mac and cheese, milkless Lucky Charms, marshmallow fluff, cream of wheat soup, and of course, delicious hot dogs in a jar. You guys are disgusting. I did however find this Kinder Surprise egg, so if I get backed into a corner by a zombie, maybe the prize inside will choke them to death, if zombies can even choke. Speaking of, this whole situation reminds me of a video game. Do you remember Dead Rising? The Capcom game that in no way, shape or form feels like it's made by Capcom. It stars an American fella called Frank West, who goes into a zombie-infested shopping mall to uncover the scoop of a lifetime. It's quite fun, and quite old. And of course, to hide the fact that I'm actually a small child using a voice filter, I think we should review it. So, join me in the first of the Dead Rising retrospectives to see if I can live out the American dream the way society has shown me, shooting guns and mercilessly game-ending people who make me fear for my life. Released in 2006, Dead Rising is a game that puts a spin on the zombie game formula. Capcom's previous hit zombie title, Resident Evil, is known for being a tad scary, and then becoming more action-based as the series progresses. Capcom wanted to do something different for Dead Rising, and opted to make the game more humor-focused with their take on zombies. This is shown by the fact that Capcom focused on the mechanics of using just about anything to bash in the skulls of the undead. The game was originally going to take place at a strip mall with a lot less stores, but as the game progressed in development, Capcom decided to turn the Willamette shopping mall into a massive stereotypical American shopping center. However, people got worried that the game was infringing on George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, which also showcased people living inside of a shopping mall during a zombie apocalypse. Capcom then told these naysayers to not worry about it because wholly unpredictable idea, translating to, bro, it's zombies in a shopping mall, it's so generic nobody is going to be bothered by it. The game received a demo on August 4th on Xbox Live, and then 4 days later the game launched on August 8th, 2006. The gameplay of Dead Rising is quite simple, which isn't surprising seeing as it was released in 2006 and we had not yet reached the monkey age of gaming. In Dead Rising, you play as Frank West, a seasoned journalist who's covered wars, you know. He travels to the recently zombie-infested town of Willamette in order to get the scoop and become filthy rich in the process. In Dead Rising, the world is your weapon.
You rang?
Oh, I won't be needing you for at least another 9 to 12 months.
Oh, okay.
The game takes place over a 72-hour period inside of the Willamette Mall, meaning that you're essentially free to fuck about and do a wide variety of activities until the bombs drop, killing everyone. These activities include, but aren't limited to, robbing gun stores, going on joyrides, rescuing survivors, acquiring drip, and actually focusing on the main missions or ones. The biggest part of Dead Rising's gameplay is of course killing the undead in a variety of ways, some more effective than others. You can quite literally use anything you can pick up as a weapon. Guns, blunt weapons, sharp weapons, benches, a fucking flower pot, and even a chair. Killing zombies rewards you with PP. Most kills however don't reward you with PP, so you'll have to level up by gaining 500 PP every 50 kills. There are however some solid ways of farming PP. Defeating psychopaths, the game's main form of boss fights, rewards you with a set amount of PP, starting at 20,000 which will go up throughout the game with each additional psychopath you defeat. Finding and rescuing survivors work the same way, as well as killing special enemy types, ranging from cult members to Obama's drones to personnel of the United States military. Also rewards you with a large amount of PP. The game is different for most in this way, where most games become harder as you go through it. This one actually becomes easier the further you get into it. There's also the FromSoft category, where you get consistently fucked throughout the entire experience. Escorting and actually rescuing survivors has to be one of the most cumbersome, saddening, and downright depressing tasks I've had to complete in a game for quite a while, as the AI might be some of the most brain dead I've had to deal with. They'll constantly get stuck on objects, run into walls, or just downright get lost, leaving you to frantically search for them as their health bar whittles away. It is even harder to complete these missions when you're a weak, low-level bitch, as you can't tank as many hits, carry as many overpowered weapons, or sprint like a certain blue hedgehog. Take this pair of redditors for example, Aaron and Bert. I found them holed up inside of a clothing store, and after shooting some sense into Bert, they agreed to follow me to the nearby safe house. I, however, took too long to get them there. This resulted in Aaron blowing his brains out. Total overreaction if you ask me. But hey, we balled. Tough times create hard men, or something like that. All of your missions, main and side, come in the form of scoops, which are given to you by this kind old black gentleman named Otis. He randomly calls you throughout the game to let you know about the fun activities happening throughout the mall. It however seems that Capcom has decided to program him in the most asshole way possible, as he always seems to call when you're predisposed, primarily when you're in a life or death situation. He's also not taking no for an answer, as declining his calls will just result in him calling you back within 4 nanoseconds only to scold you for doing so in the first place. The worst part about this is that the devs quite literally put an achievement in the game where you must answer every call from Otis on the first try, so that's fun. PP can also be earned by doing Frank's actual job, which is taking pictures of stuff and things happening around you. The more horrific and terrifying, the better. See somebody getting sacrificed by a cult? Snap a picture. See someone getting torn limb from limb by a horde of ravenous flesh eaters? Snap a picture. Are you actively engaged in close quarters combat with a Satan worshipping zealot currently running at you while wielding a medieval sword? You guessed it, snap a picture. Brutality, drama, outtake, horror, and erotica are the 5 genres of PP photos, and you'll want to get as many of them to rise through the ranks to up your maximum health, attack strength, inventory space, throwing distance, and running speed. You'll also unlock new melee attacks which you'll use maybe once before forgetting about them altogether. You can also craft combo wait, that's only in the second game? Fuck. Joining Frank on this American dream of an adventure is a short cast of characters who never leave the safe house, because the one time they do, they immediately get turned into a glorified flashback for the Horde. Another thing that sets this game apart from the rest is that you're always on the clock. A blue bar means you have more than 6 hours to complete a scoop, yellow means less than 6, red means less than 3, and grey means you were too slow. I advise not being too slow with the main scoops, as missing these will just end the game, sending you back to whenever you remember to last save. There are no autosaves, and I had to find that out the hard way. I'll now describe what your average playthrough could look like. Our story starts off with Frank flying into the walled-off city of Willamette. On our way towards the mall, we take pictures of all sorts of horrific acts of violence. This city is incredibly detailed for how little of the game actually takes place here. It makes me wonder if we were once meant to be able to leave the mall and explore it on foot, but it ended up being cut due to budget constraints or hardware limitations. It doesn't take long for the US military to get involved, ruining our fun. We land on the roof and catch our breath for about 1 second before being ambushed by this strange-looking Mexican fella, who acts very suspicious and mysterious. I wonder if he's withholding some critical and important information. We head inside and take a nap because Frank is a balding middle-aged man. We head down into the mall to find it's actually pretty peaceful. The doors are barricaded and the zombies are locked out. This peaceful utopia lasts for all about 2 minutes before this white lady opens the door in order to rescue her dog, which is unironically the most white lady thing she could do during a zombie outbreak. The next few minutes of footage are the screams of the innocent as they are brutally killed by the undead. All the important characters however survive, so that's lucky, and we meet the gang: Brad, Jesse, and Otis. The safe house is also where you have to bring any survivors you find and decide to rescue. We then get a survivor rescue tutorial. I however have terminal stupidity and accidentally leave one behind, not noticing the health bar as it is dropping at an alarming rate. We talk to Jesse. Rip Bozo. You aim a gun with Q because this game was designed by actual cave trolls. I run out into the courtyard before getting a call from Otis and having to run right back to where I came from. Great timing, Otis. I go to a food court and meet German985. It takes me about 10 minutes to take 2 pictures of him. Terminal stupidity. I go to help Brad and get to fight our first boss. Ah shoot, Who would have thought I was this upstanding and respectable civilian? I am, however, sorely unprepared, underleveled, and unskilled. Turns out Frank is a lot tankier than I originally thought, easily taking a few dozen bullets of an M16, but dying from a rather small drop. It is here that I get acquainted with the gruesome 2006 save system design by being sent back to the start of the game. Great game design. A brisk 20 minutes later, I make it back to Brad, where I then exploit the game by getting infinite handguns from him. I guess being American does have its advantages. Brad tells us that we're a little bitch, and I find a chainsaw and break it within a minute. I then go to save Aaron and Bert, but you already know how this ends. Fun fact, you already get PP just for having them join you. You can actually just leave them to die without any repercussions if you believe in the classic every man for himself motto. Nighttime comes around and we witness 3 escaped convicts brutally murder an old man. Frank looks mildly unamused by this. We attempt to rescue the girl and it goes about as well as you would expect. We're then shown the effects of what happens to normal people when they listen to UK drill. I return to the safe house and I'm told to just wait around for like 7 in-game hours. I spent the next few hours fucking about in the mall before then being informed of this suspicious looking clown fella. Luckily, I just so happened to be carrying my military grade vehicle mounted 50 cal assault weapon, quickly dispatching him with it. I obtained a mini chainsaw for my troubles, one of the all-time GOAT weapons from the series. If only I could strap it to a paddle. I then proceed to rescue Greg. I then go to rescue a couple of Japanese tourists who don't speak any English. You can find a Japanese book in order to get them to join you, but my Frank West is canonically a Republican who only speaks the language of freedom. So I lure a couple of zombies inside the store and leave them to their own devices. I then go to a gun store in order to get myself acquainted with its current proprietor. Twitch chat says that I can hide behind the little stands to heal. Turns out they fucking lied. So, I respawn, actually rescue Greg, and return to Cletus with vengeance. I decided to completely break the balance of the game again by bringing my military-grade vehicle-mounted 50 cal assault weapon, absolutely obliterating him within literal seconds. I become even more Americanized by stealing more shotguns than the average Texas-based family of 4 has. I then actually rescue my first survivor. Before taking a look at my current progress, I then go to rescue the old guy from the start of the game. He's being held captive by Carlito, who's wielding a Barrett 50 cal from Modern Warfare this time around. The fight ends with Brad getting shot, so naturally we're asked to get some medicine. On our way there, I fight Cliff, a Vietnam vet who went insane after hearing the voices. I would have loved to have silenced them for him, but unfortunately I was running out of time and Brad was running out of blood. So I speedrun the Steven boss fight before then making it back in the absolute nick of time. Fuck, I'm good at this game. I save Ronald before the game proceeds to up its own difficulty by adding a bunch of raincoat wearing cultists to the mall. They'll randomly spawn in groups armed with knives and explosives. They also have the ability to throw some Cheeto dust into your face, which results in being kidnapped and getting placed into an entirely different predicament. We then go girl hunting.
Please have a seat right there.
Which ends with me blasting heaps of shotgun shells into Isabella's general direction as she attempts to run me over on her bike. I then kill a family of 3 by repeatedly quickscoping them. I save Sally and Nick. Sally and Nick die to a psychopath. I kill the psychopath and try to escort 4 survivors at once. Serves me right for wanting to have actual morals. I reload my save and act like I was never informed of the survivors in the first place before meeting up with Isabella, who asks us to bring her back to the other survivors. It's at this point where we meet the absolute GOAT of the Dead Rising list of characters wiki. Kendall, this absolute Adonis of a man, comes with an infinite ammo shotgun and the wettest drip money can buy. I'm then told of the whereabouts of the It cosplaying cult, going there before dying not once, not twice, but 3 times to the cult's leader, Jacksepticeye. I only managed to beat him on the 4th attempt because I brought a cool little item called a shotgun. Barnaby then dies after seeing the review scores for Dead Rising 4. I go to stock up at the usual gun store only to find it occupied by another 3 rednecks who aren't so welcoming to strangers.
Guys, stop, guys. What in the actual fuck was that?
I then farm some kills to pass the time before then being told of Carlito's plan. He's planted a bunch of explosive underneath of the mall, with the resulting explosion having the capacity to scatter parasites over the entire planet. So we drive down into the maintenance tunnels collecting bombs and fighting Carlito for a 3rd time. This time he's armed with a van. If at all possible, don't break your car. This had to have been by far the most bullshit section of the game. There's no healing items in the tunnels, no real movement options apart from one lousy sedan, and essentially no viable options to fight against the massive undead hordes. That being said, I still managed to beat Carlito for that massive PP bonus. Doing so teleports you to a scripted sequence, completely changing your location and taking away my bike, aka my main method of travel in this hellscape. This situation was getting a little fucking dire. I had no weapons, no healing items, was entirely stranded, and had 4 quests in the red zone. So, I fucking pulled up my pants, sat up straight in my ridiculously overpriced gaming chair before making a heroic sprint for the exit of the tunnel. Of course I fucking died. Do you see how little fucking health I had left? My second time goes a lot smoother. I even had a bottle of wine to spare, and in the only instance of Brad taking on Carlito on his own, he royally gets his ass handed to him. But we're not in the clear yet, as we're given a not so optional mission of stopping Kendall the Shotgun Knight from just taking all of us survivors out of the safe room and into the mall. But it's fine, because all you need to do to change his mind is just talk to him once. Neat. I spent the next 10 minutes running around the safe house, just waiting for the next case to unlock, which is just following Isabella to her own hideout, which is located conveniently close to the aforementioned gun store. I am immediately told to return to Jesse, who reveals that Carlito got kidnapped by Nikocado Avocado. We get to the slaughterhouse and, as you should expect by now, fight the suspicious looking character until one of us is dead. Luckily for me, the butcher has chronic stupidity and ends up getting stuck on the meat. Carlito dies, but before he does, he spills the beans on why he's the villain of the story. Turns out the American government was up to no good in an underdeveloped and impoverished country, experimenting with some shit and accidentally wiping out an entire city in the process. Not the first time we'll see that little plot point come up throughout the series either. Also, we're in the endgame now. All that's left are the facts, which is literally just a cutscene. All that's left now is to wait for noon on the next day, where we can finally get the fuck out of this place. Next on the agenda is quite literally just 13 in-game hours of me driving a car around to watch a number go up in the corner of the screen. Very reminiscent of Just Cause 2 completion. Midnight does come with a brand new caveat. The military is here to clean up the mess and they're not taking any prisoners. Which I'm not complaining about, as that means that Otis won't have to call me about stranded survivors anymore. Over the course of the next 12 hours, there's progressively less and less giant hordes of zombies, with the military's presence becoming ever more threatening to the player, which is honestly a really good change of pace to the, by this point, rather stale zombie killing. So I got a little over 10,000 kills before going to the helipad for my date with Ed. He's however ambushed by a zombie that managed to sneak into the chopper, causing it to crash. I initially thought this was the worst ending possible, as the full credit sequence started to play while we're getting surrounded by zombies. Here's my survivor chart. Fucking hell. Yeah, we didn't do too hot. Well said, past me. Well said. Turns out it's fucking bait, however, as our main gal Isabella comes out to save our bum ass. It's then revealed to us that Frank hasn't turned from all the zombie bites we've received throughout the game because he's already infected. However, I am running out of time, so I need to get myself some stuff to make an antivirus, which requires coffee filters, a blender, and a camp stove for some reason. While doing this, I find the wreckage of Ed's helicopter, confirming that he is indeed dead, but also finding that there's a convenient tunnel inside of the mall's clock tower. So we return to Isabella with everything she needs for her little science project, but turns out that we're missing one crucial ingredient: queen bees. How many, you ask? 10. Fucking 10. 10? Really? I then spent, no joke, 30 fucking minutes mindlessly shooting zombies in hopes of getting a bunch of 2% drops. Am I playing Dead Rising or World of Warcraft here? After that mildly annoying experience, we finally get cured and make our way down into the spooky tunnel. I monotonously shoot my way through the tunnel, burning through 4 fully loaded assault rifles. That's 600 rounds of pure death, by the way. I then get tasked with taking out 2 lousy soldiers, who actually almost end up being the death of me. We then partake in the most boring boss fight in the game, fighting a tank like it's Call of Duty or some boring shit like that. We then take part in the actual final boss, Brock, leader of the cleanup crew and the US military's finest. So you can tell he's evil because he's smoking a cigar while monologuing. Brock is the only boss that you'll have to take on entirely without weapons, which would make him the hardest in the game if I didn't manage to glitch him off the tank, leaving him to get relentlessly attacked by zombies and me to farm PP by taking pictures of it happening. The game ends with some text telling us that however great of a tragedy the entire extinction of a town was, the regular populace soon forgot it even happened in the first place, which is a frighteningly realistic take on the whole thing. So that's Dead Rising then, a game from 2006 that holds up ridiculously well. Shame on me for not getting around to it sooner. This is one of those games that I can already call one of the games of all time, with me returning to it once every few years to do a new playthrough or just generally fuck about it. I mean, I instantly started a second playthrough with mods so I could actually see all of the content it had to offer, which was a surprising amount. I missed a few psychopaths and a couple dozen survivors that I didn't even know existed in my first playthrough, which is also why this video took way longer to make than I originally anticipated. This game is quite honestly really impressive, and instantly set quite the high bar for open world games on the 7th generation. I really can't think of any that come close in scale off the top of my head besides Grand Theft Auto games and Dead Rising sequels obviously. Massive props to Capcom for their insane work on this game. Truly impressive. Dead Rising gets a well-deserved 8 cameras out of 10. Imagine, if you will, you're Capcom. Dead Rising did pretty good, got some good reviews, and you want to do a sequel. Well, you think to yourself, I could totally work with the same developers who helped me make the first game, and then improve upon all the aspects of the first game to deliver a delightful and interesting story that many people will cherish for years to come. Or I could totally scrap that idea and take a massive gamble, and that's exactly what Capcom did. They decided to work with another in-house developer, Blue Castle Games, which would then become known as Capcom Vancouver. Keiji Inafune was still involved in the game though, as well as other members of the original team. They wanted to take a gamble, and they wanted to do it right. The thing is, Capcom was banking on Dead Rising 2 to do really well. The game was announced on February 9th, 2009, after some rumors and a now defunct viral video showing off the game. It was supposed to be bigger and better than its predecessor. Capcom even pulled out some of the big guns and started marketing the game, doing one of those fancy ARG things all the kids are talking about. Websites like tapeitordie.com and visitfortunecity.com popped up advertising the game's location to the world. Keiji Inafune made an 8-part video series called Zombrex: Dead Rising Sun, and my personal favorite, Capcom sponsored a gathering of zombies outside of British Parliament, and the best dressed won a game console. And just in case you didn't think Capcom's mocking of the state of British politics was over, they even ran a political party called CURE, or Citizens for Undead Rights and Equality, as a parody of a British political party. The BBC says some of their campaign pledges include give the undead equal rights to the living, make cemeteries more comfortable for their inhabitants, stop zombie racism, increase minimum retirement age for zombies, and legalize marriage between the living and the undead. Quite the list here. I'm surprised it didn't pass considering the actual zombies running the place. Aside from all those hilarious shenanigans, Dead Rising 2 is more of the same in a different location, with the game releasing on September 28, 2010, trading their shopping mall for a larger one and a casino. Because much like how Capcom changed developers to take a gamble, they also decided to change the location to Vegas, baby! I'll feel right at home here since I've been fighting a gambling addiction ever since I discovered Counter-Strike trading cards. Dead Rising 2 starts off with Case Zero, which isn't Dead Rising 2 at all. It's actually a standalone DLC released in August of 2010 on Xbox Arcade, about a month before the initial launch of the second main game. It takes place in the small derelict town of Still Creek, about 2 years after the Willamette outbreak and 3 years before the Fortune City outbreak. This prologue introduces us to Two's protagonist, Chuck Green, and his 4-year-old daughter Katie after they have fled from the glamorous gambling capital of the world, Las Vegas, after a zombie outbreak started there. In it, Chuck lost his wife to the virus and had his daughter get bitten by his zombified wife. Tough break, but I'm sure things will only get better. This means she'll need Zombrex every 24 hours, a fun little plot device that definitely isn't extremely annoying to keep tabs on. The short 2-hour-ish prelude serves to introduce the player to the mechanics, controls, and gameplay of Dead Rising 2. Overall, there are pretty large similarities between the first and second game. Similarities being rescuing survivors and gaining PP, and differences being, of course, combo weapons, which are a new mechanic that allows the player to combine 2 items into one that's more powerful. There's only 9 available in Case Zero, instead of the usual 50, so I'll touch back on that later. There's also 10 survivors to find and rescue, which will help in leveling up Chuck, who you can get up to level 5 before you start your main playthrough of Dead Rising 2. The game takes place over a 12-hour period, starting with Chuck arriving at the town in his truck, having his truck get stolen, and then finding and building a bike from scratch while helping out and doing favors for the town survivors. After collecting the required parts, as well as a dose of Keiji Zombrex, we are confronted by Jed, the town's crazed scrap collector who wields a shotgun with a pitchfork attached to it. He serves as a great introduction to the absolute lunatics that we'll face throughout the course of the main game. After defeating him, we hop on our bike and speed off with the military hot on our tail. There's a short little post-ending stinger that sees Chuck find the truck from the start of the game, where he dons the, at this point, iconic yellow and black IJIC racing jacket before hopping on his bike, telling his daughter that he loves her, and driving off into the sunset. Never ever having to kill any more undead ever again. Until now at least. We catch up with Chuck Green in the newly established Fortune City, a Las Vegas themed amusement and entertainment resort built after the fall of the real Las Vegas. The gameplay of Dead Rising 2 is rather largely the same compared to its predecessor. But there are, however, a decent amount of improvements and overall quality of life changes that do make the game a bit more enjoyable. Most notably, the transceiver system has been updated so that calls regarding psychopaths or survivors no longer need to be manually answered while you're out fighting the undead. Instead, these are just added to Chuck's quest log. The only calls you'll actually need to manually answer are the story-related ones, and you can still skip through the dialogue. So, no more getting scolded by a geriatric security guard. The AI of survivors has also been greatly improved upon, with them now being able to actually defend themselves in a somewhat competent manner, and zombies even focusing on attacking the player instead of the actual survivors, making escorts much less tedious. Photographing in-game events is entirely absent on account that Chuck is not a photographer. The shooting mechanics are greatly improved, with Chuck being able to move around while shooting, making him a much harder target for zombies. Also improved are the vehicle mechanics, with them being noticeably less robust. You can also drive a wider variety of them, such as a Mini Cooper inside of the Royal Flush Plaza, and a Humvee located on the Silver Strip. A money system has also been implemented because this is fucking Vegas, baby. Of course there's a reason to collect a boatload of cash. Money can be earned through rescuing certain survivors, breaking ATMs, finding it inside of the casinos, and just by caving in and playing one of the hundreds of slot machines and other gambling related minigames. The HUD also received a slight makeover, with it being made to look a lot more dirty, giving off this almost decomposing vibe. Chuck Swatch is also digital, so you no longer need a mathematics degree in order to read it. Another new mechanic that I quickly touched on earlier is the aforementioned Zombrex medication. This scarcely available and overpriced experimental drug is what stops anyone who's been previously bitten from turning, including Katie. There's however one little caveat to this experimental drug. You need to take it once every 24 hours on the dot in order to stop yourself from turning into one of the flesh eaters. Zombrex can be acquired through a few different methods. Certain survivors will give you a dose upon rescuing them, but you can also find them around the resort in some hard to reach places. Or if that sounds like too much effort, you can also just buy a dose for 25 grand inside of one of the pawn shops. Pawn shops also sell a random assortment of items and combo weapons. But what are combo weapons? Combo weapons are rather self-explanatory, as they let the player combine two items together that would otherwise not be very effective, into a much more effective, durable, and lethal weapon. Each one of these weapons also lets the player earn PP in a much more effective way. I do however have a few issues with this system. Combo weapons are only able to be crafted on workbenches located inside of the resort's maintenance rooms, besides the one that's actually en route to the safe house, meaning you'll constantly have to go out of your way in order to craft more combo weapons, since they are undoubtedly the best way to defeat psychopaths and cull the undead hordes. Another downside of the system is that due to the in-game clock, you really can't spend that much time looking around for a specific item to make a specific combo weapon. And since items spawn in a set location and aren't random RNG based drops, you're largely restricted to whatever items you either find a dozen times within 100 feet, or the ones that are always located near or inside the maintenance rooms. This is also why 90% of my gameplay is comprised of spiked bats, since you can find enough items to craft like 4 of them within a minute of leaving the safe house. However, you're not supposed to just randomly combine some items and hope you get a working combination, as the game will reward you with combo cards which show you the required items for your weapon. 34 can be unlocked by just leveling up, 4 by saving survivors, 2 by defeating certain psychopaths, and 8 by finding and inspecting in-game movie posters. And then there's also the Spiked Bat, which acts as an introductory combo weapon, and the Wingman, which is a secret item purely for an achievement. You can also prove how good of a dad you are by bringing Katie an assortment of neat items that children would enjoy, I guess. I don't know, I'm not a child. Human enemies also make a return for some additional PP farming. Their variety is however a lot more limited, as besides your usual psychopaths, there's looters, who are essentially just dudes with a melee item that go down in 2 to 3 hits. Lastly, I want to quickly run over the map and its layout. It's honestly a massive improvement over the first game, with each location having its own theme, style, and personality. First off is the Americana Casino, an American-themed casino complete with a barbecue and steak restaurant. Next up is the Atlantica Casino, which is an ocean-themed casino featuring Poseidon statues, treasure chests, and massive seashells. Thirdly, there's the Slot Ranch Casino, home to the largest slot machine in the game, capable of payouts up to $100,000. As well as the single greatest money farming minigame ever conceived. And lastly, the Yucatan Casino is an Aztec themed one, complete with tiki torches and stone statues. There's also like a dozen malls, plazas, and other shopping related locations to explore, but that's about enough rambling for now. Let's talk about what I actually got up to during my playthrough. Chuck is here to compete in a new event of Terror is Reality, a game show in which contestants kill zombies in order to rack up points. After a brief cutscene, we are introduced to the absolute grandiose scale that this entire game just emanates. The larger scale does allow for a much more insane cast of characters, as well as an expansive cast of survivors and psychopaths. We then participate in a game of Slicicles, where 4 contestants drive around an arena in order to run zombies over on a motorcycle with a pair of chainsaws attached. TIR is also playable with your friends as an entirely separate mode. You and up to 3 of your friends can compete in 9 different event modes such as Ballbuster, Master Shafter, and the ever iconic Slicicles. I never got to play any of these since nobody seems to own this game on PC, but the servers are still up for it, nearly a decade later. Pretty impressive. Nobody owning this game on PC might also have to do with the fact that this game is not a fan of modern computer systems, instead wanting to actively kill your computer. Saving your game by taking a leak returns from the original, and after doing so, getting teased by women equally crazy as they are hot, shit hits the fan as we are involuntarily thrust into the Fortune City outbreak. It isn't time for copious amounts of zombie killing just yet, however, instead rescuing our daughter, leaving the arena, and making our way towards the nearby emergency shelter with a dozen other people. It's here we're introduced to our supporting cast, or at least a few of them, these being Raymond Sullivan, a Fortune City security guard, and Stacy Forsythe, which is more on the nose than that one Japanese game with the footballers.
Ray McScriff, Dean Wesry, Glenn Allen Nixon, Mike Truck, Mario McElwain.
After talking to Stacy, we're sent on our first Zombies run for Katie, going to a nearby pharmacy in order to find some. But instead of finding some less than friendly looters, we casually commit manslaughter before talking to the nurse, receiving Zombies as a reward and taking her back to the safe house. It's here that you truly get to experience the absolute peak of AI. I mean, holy fuck. One could only dream of saving someone at level 1 in the first game. So, I spend a few minutes just standing about until it's 7 AM before shooting Katie up with some dubious substance. We watch a news broadcast where Rebecca Chang tells us that this wasn't an accident, but instead a full-on terrorist attack. And Chuck Green's responsible in this camera footage, that I can't show you because my cutscene conveniently froze. So, we head out to find Rebecca, but before we do, Ray gives us a key to access the maintenance rooms, allowing us to create combo weapons. One cool building montage later and I'm ready to give skulls in like it's the season 7 premiere of The Walking Dead all over again. So I save a man and his wife, save a shotgun wielding man and his gun toting wife, and then get these 2 casino employees to join my party. We meet up with Rebecca, who proves herself quite capable of handling a gun, a camera, and an uncomfortable amount of sexual tension. Chuck promises her an interview in exchange for the opportunity to prove his innocence. As can be expected, we make it to the security room and find all the camera footage has been destroyed, as well as the technicians their heads. We then run back to the safe house, getting into an argument with Ray as he tries to force our daughter out of the safe house. We also manage to convince him of our innocence. For now, at least. We're then given a good 10 hours before the next main story case unlocks, allowing us to explore the resort and complete a set of the available missions. One thing I will give this game is that there's a lot more forgiving with its clock system, giving you clear windows of opportunity to go out and rescue survivors, instead of getting absolutely swamped like in its predecessor. I go out to meet my first pair of survivors, these being Kenneth, a Rootin' Tootin' Army veteran, and Jack, a Tier 3 Amaranth sub. So we tell him to shut the fuck up and follow us to the safe house, picking up this old blind woman for good measure. Man, this game's fucking easy. Stacy tells us about some suspicious activity happening in the maintenance tunnels, these being goons with guns. So we go to check it out, but not before doing a few more side quests, the first one being Meet the Contestants, which has us fight Leon Bell, a Terror is Reality contestant who went insane due to the outbreak.
Buddy, I heard you lost your wife in Vegas. I guess you suck at killing zombies, otherwise she'd still be around!
Actually, he might have always just been a prick. Leon is by far the most frustrating opponent to take down at this point in the game. Largely because you're a low level, with an equally low amount of health and stamina, but he's at least nice enough to hand us a key for a bike. Leon's fight is, well, a bit frustrating, largely due to the fact that he's armed with a motorcycle, and you aren't. This fight took me about 10 minutes, but it could have taken longer if he hadn't gotten stuck on this wall, allowing me to get some cheap hits in. He does rob us of the satisfaction of killing him, instead preferring to die by self-immolation. Barnburner sees us save a couple from a fire of their own making, before then saving this luscious lady, who's also an alcoholic. Whatever helps you cope, I suppose. We then go save Sven, a paramedic. I also go to save Jared, but he tells us he's been bitten, so he'd like some Zombrex before joining us. Upon saving Sven, he gives us a dose of Zombrex, which he couldn't have just given to Jared beforehand. What a dick. So then, I finally decide to go continue the main quest, going into the maintenance tunnels to find a small army of mercs as well as TK, who would have known. The guy who looks like a stereotypical gangster is the bad guy. So we have an action movie chase scene down the tunnel before jumping onto the train, killing a bunch of mercs before catching up to TK, who just laughs at us and disconnects it. I take a quick detour and get another dose of Zombrex that I definitely didn't look up on the internet, give a dose to Jared and another to Katie. I then do some needlessly frustrating platforming, largely because the clunky movement system clearly wasn't designed with the concept of pixel narrow jumps in mind. I do eventually make it, getting another dose of Zombrex, about $1,000 in cash, and a sword for good measure. That's a neat little tool that'll come in handy later. And by soon, I mean right now. I go to a bathroom to take a leak, but instead run into Brandon, a radical shard of glass wielding cure protester. Brandon is one of the faster psychopaths in the game, yet he's still easily beatable if you have a functioning frontal lobe. Next up, it's time for Boomtown, where it's revealed that TK is using the outbreak as a cover-up to rob and loot all of the casino vaults for some of that sweet paper. So I go out, save a trio of rock artists, a duo of construction workers, and a solo woman as well, before then fighting what I would imagine to happen to Gordon Ramsay if he were ever caught in a zombie outbreak. Chef Antoine is this extremely annoying, extremely fast, and extremely French chef. His special gimmick is that he has a frying pan, and that he can literally heal himself infinitely, meaning you can't really take your time fighting him. For being in a kitchen, there's a surprising lack of food to heal yourself with. So little in fact that I had to literally leave the boss fight in order to get more from the restaurant next door. We then go do the next case, which involves me killing groups of mercs as well as destroying their drills which they're using to get into the vaults. Finally, I always wanted to play Payday 2 as the cops. So I break an armored van, TK throws a fit, and she finally allows us to meet her source. We then meet a man named Janus, who's just been gambling since the start of the outbreak. Absolute Sigma. Get your money up, king. Upon saving him, he gives me a small loan of $70,000. I also save a golfer in the process. I then go to meet Slappy, the character that's single-handedly responsible for not allowing 14-year-old me to finish this game. Not only is his mask absolutely terrifying, he's also such a fucking pain to fight as he roller skates around while firing a pair of makeshift flamethrowers. I genuinely think this fight is impossible if you yourself didn't bring a gun of some sort, since being hit by his fire results in getting stun locked. I was only able to beat him because he fell down to the lower floor, and I found this handy shotgun. I then go to meet Rebecca's source, but am instead ambushed by the two femme fatales from the start of the game. Now, I'm not one to kink shame, but once you start involving knives in the bedroom, I'm out. Amber and Crystal are definitely a dynamic duo, but they're not too hard to handle due to the copious amounts of alcohol strewn about the dance floor, and you only gotta defeat one of them for the other to just forfeit the match. It also comes with an absolute banger of a team, which is also the only one that won't get me copyright struck. Afterwards, we go fight another psychopath, this one being Randy, a chainsaw-wielding, pig mask-wearing gimp fanatic. He's trying to forcefully marry this woman named Danny, and that's not bonkers. Upon defeating him, we are rewarded with a pretty cool unique weapon. I then go to fight Carl, a crazed UPS mailman who will make sure you get your package on time, even if he has to kill to make sure of it. Fuck, if only half our mailmen were as dedicated to the cause. I wouldn't have to wait over a month for a fucking hoodie. After defeating him, I go out to, fetch females.
Mark, please have a seat right here.
But before doing so, I get challenged to a high-stakes game of poker.
I have no clue how to play poker.
But it's fine because I can just murder them and move on with my life. I fetch the aforementioned females by giving them 10 grand of my hard-stolen cash. Man, Chuck's really fallen off. I proceed to gamble to pass the time, which is the best reason to gamble really, before then giving Katie another shot of Zombrex. I then go out to rescue a hungry man before then helping Woodrow withdrawing some cash from the nearby ATMs. Remember guys, it isn't illegal if you aren't the one directly committing the crime. The game then adds a little more spice to the Platinum Strip by adding these 4 sniping rednecks to some of the rooftops who'll continually take potshots at you if you find yourself traversing their territory. Each one of them comes with their own sniper rifle, as well as a melee weapon if you get too close for their comfort. Fighting them is actually pretty entertaining, as when you do, they start spouting off a whole bunch of pro-gun, pro-freedom rhetoric, but once you do defeat the first one, you can use their sniper against the next one, and so on. So I dispatch Johnny, Derek, and Big Earl, glitch hopping for a bit and then taking out the gang's leader, Deets.
Deets nuts.
I then play some more poker and it goes about as well as you'd expect. Actually, it ended even worse, as I ended up with a lot less clothes on. I chuck on my threads again, forgetting about the shoes, and then talk to a woman, who only wants to join me if I strip down to my boxers. Again. But not before fighting Seymour, a mall cop wielding a 6-shooter capable of disarming you with his eagle-eye levels of accuracy. He's actually one of the easier bosses in the game, going down in like a dozen hits. So, I take off my clothes again, find Ray who was hiding out from Mr. High Noon before rescuing both him and Europa. I then meet Randolph, a man who won't stop crying because nobody will ever buy his piss-poor art. I chuck him a few grand because I have terrible money management skills. Oh, that got a bit too real there. I go steal a golf club for Luz, ride a bull, and rescue Dean, a limping army veteran who refuses to be carried or even supported. 0 out of 10, most annoying survivor so far. I then go find a man who truly lives by the quote, 99% of all gamblers quit right before hitting it big. He'll only join me after I fork over 20,000 of my hard-earned cash, with an additional 5k on top because he's a bit of a greedy prick. We then meet Bibi, a busty MILF who tasks us to collect a whole bunch of stuff. After doing so, she seemingly soft locks herself in place, refusing to follow us or even move at all. So I cut my losses and rescue the other 3 as well as the shotgun wielding Bill. The main story reels its time crunched head around again and we meet with Rebecca on the roof, discovering that TK is trying to escape using this gif of a helicopter. We make it to the roof, killing zombies and mercs alike before then having a face-off with the literal helicopter, which we defeat by throwing items into its rotor until it blows up, including the money. Real shame. I could have used that, to be honest. At this point, there's about 12 hours left before you're rescued by the military, so I gotta move on and rescue a mermaid, a shell-shocked survivor, and 2 comedians.
Okay, get ready to laugh. What does a vegan zombie eat? Grains. Grains, get it?
And then fighting 2 morally dubious Cirque du Soleil musicians with anger issues. They're a cool duo and reward you with one of the more fun combo weapons. So, we save a feuding family, give Katie even more dubious narcotics, and then the military rolls up. Or well, the anti-zombie unit to be more specific. Led by this bald pitbull looking dude, Sergeant Dwight Boykin. Naturally, as should be expected with any sort of military force in any sort of zombie media, they get wiped the floor with within only a few minutes. The zombies now come with a new variant. Gas zombies are a new type of zombie, looking a lot more diseased and deadly. They usually take a few more hits, even from combo weapons, and are capable of moving faster, spitting blood on their targets to stun them, and if they manage to grapple onto you, can absolutely destroy your health bar if you manage to mess up the QTEs. We then go fight Boykin, who's gone completely insane, talking to his dead comrades and shooting at anything that moves, alive or undead. It's honestly one of the darker scenes in this game, seeing a hardened soldier completely lose his mind at the sight of his entire unit and friends getting torn limb from limb. Anyways, that's enough intelligent writing for one video. Now to shoot him and rescue Rebecca. After doing so, we go talk to TK, who says that Chuck would have been the perfect guy to take the fall, on account of his wife dying and all that. We're having a fun little chat in the security room, and before we know, zombies somehow manage to break into our crib. This part has you collect a generator, a gasoline barrel, and a comedically large spool of wire to hotwire a panel. This is also a race against the clock, as all your rescued survivors are here, actively fighting for their lives, and the longer you take, the more of them will die. We then hack the panel in the least hacky way possible, by literally just spamming spacebar. TK gets bit by a single zombie because plot, and we watch a news report where they say that the military has made it to the shelter, finding everyone already dead. How American. The group theorizes that TK is just a pawn in a much bigger game, knowing that it's impossible for him to make military level commands, i.e. firebombing an entire city and all that. The only one that isn't fully on board by the end is Sullivan. At this point, we're also tasked with getting Zobrix for TK. However, I figured that if I beat the game before his time runs out, I won't have to worry about it. So we look at some more camera footage and discover that the gas is coming from the underground of the city. We head on down there only to find a full-on military organized zombie harvesting operation. That's right, the only way to make Zombrex is by collecting queen bees, much like Frank had to do in the first game. So, we kill a bunch more dudes and find the laptop with a very messy desktop. Like, Jesus Christ, can you please sort out those icons? We get the laptop back to the safe house and discover a company named Phenotrans is behind the outbreak. A pharmaceutical company that produces Zombrex. What? A company starting a pandemic in order to up their stock? Alex Jones is right. Rebecca attempts to call her station but gets 1D'd by Sullivan, revealing that he was on Phenotrans' payroll the whole time. How shocking. We chase Sullivan to the rooftop of the Yucatan Casino, where we have a 1v1 with a laser-accurate boomer. Seriously man, he's gotta be fucking aimbotting since he literally doesn't miss. While fighting him, there's also an airplane, shooting rockets down at us, capable of blowing holes into the rooftop, making it much harder to move around. You can even get knocked down onto the lower levels of the casino. Overall, this is a pretty cool final boss, on account that I actually had to fight him instead of him completely bugging out and getting hounded by zombies. Sullivan might be a middle-aged man, but he still got moves, capable of sending Chuck flying through the air like a ragdoll. After beating him, Sullivan attempts to leave via skyhook, but we tie him to the roof, literally tearing him a new asshole. We then call Rebecca's news station, asking for a rescue. A few days later, all of the survivors have been rescued, but Katie forgets her backpack, and Chuck refuses to leave without it because of sentimental values. Chuck is then ambushed by a zombified TK, pinning him to the ground as he allows Stacy and Katie to leave. We then get some more post-game text screens. It said that the safe house survivors were rescued, Chuck Green was cleared of all charges, despite having gone missing, and that Phenotrans, despite the controversy, kept their stock prices thriving. Now, this wasn't ending S, this was ending A, which has since been proven to be the canon one, since it lines up with Dead Rising 2's second DLC, Case West. Ending S, the best ending, requires you to complete every case, but also give TK the Zombrix he needs before finishing the game, i.e. the only thing I forgot to do. It starts the exact same way, with all the survivors getting on the chopper and Chuck heading back to find Stacy and Katie, only to find out TK escaped and is now holding them hostage. He tasks us to collect a bunch of items before heading to the arena from the start of the game, where we fight TK on the light rig above the terrorist reality grounds. We also have to continuously crank an elevator up to stop the aforementioned duo from dropping down into the crowd of zombies. After defeating him, Chuck throws him over the edge with a pretty banger one-liner.
If you're ever really gonna win big.
I'm actually pretty happy that I didn't have to fight this guy, as all the YouTube videos I could find of him made the encounter look like an absolute pain in the ass. Ending B is unlocked if you fail any cases after 6-1, or fail to defeat Sullivan during the climax. Both will result in the city being firebombed. Ending C is earned if the player fails a case before 6-1, but keeps Katie alive with Zombrex and is inside of the safe house when the military arrives. This one results in everyone being killed by Sullivan in order to stop the truth from being spread. Ending D needs the player to complete every case up until the military arrives, but be caught outside of the safe house. This will result in Chuck getting captured by the soldiers. And lastly, Ending F, in which you just forget to care for your daughter, letting her turn. Let me roll it back a few minutes though, back to when I said Case West. This DLC starts off right where Ending A left off, with Chuck having a tussle with the undead TK himself. He's however rescued by everyone's favorite war journalist, Frank West. Frank tells us that he's got a source at a secret military facility. It's also revealed that he's still reliant on Zombrex to stop himself from turning. Nice continuity. So, this DLC has our duo fight their way through the facility in a 2-hour-long adventure. Co-op is also available for this, much like the base game. But there's less reality breaking since one of the players is now Chuck, and the other, Frank. Your base game progress also carries over, allowing you to keep your special attack moves, level, and some of your health. During the DLC, you'll fight a lot more armed guards than you're used to. They are also capable of throwing flashbangs, stunning the player. There's even mini-bosses in the form of the Juggernaut looking fellas. Both of the main characters now come equipped with a camera that they can use to photograph objects of interest for some bonus PP. Throughout the DLC, we find a whole bunch of story mumbo-jumbo, evidence clearing Chuck of his crimes, as well as blueprints for the Fortune City Queen harvesting operation. After a while, we make it to an experimental lab where we run into Frank's source, who is revealed to be Isabella Keys. She explains that she isn't willingly working with them before we then come face to face with the Bollywood-looking commander of the facility. After easily defeating him on account of having about a dozen overpowered firearms, the big bad then tells us some generic shit about zombie bad, but humanity worse, before blowing up the facility, and our pair of heroes begrudgingly leaving without finding their cure. And that's Dead Rising 2. It's definitely a lot lengthier, in-depth and more fleshed out than the first game, on account of the bigger budget and larger development team I'd imagine. Regardless, I absolutely loved going back to a game that I first played before I even made an actual PSN account. I definitely preferred 2's gameplay over its predecessor, as the combo weapons, while silly, definitely add a lot more replayability to the game. Its cast of psychopaths was also a lot more out there than a majority of the first game. The story was also a lot longer and fleshed out. While still being a bit corny, there were definitely some good twists in it that I didn't see coming. I give this game and all of its DLC a very clean-shaven 7 solies out of 10. Hot off the heels of Dead Rising 2, Capcom couldn't get enough of the game. 2 DLCs came out for it, one of them called Case Zero that was a prequel to the game, and one of them called Case West. This one let players take control of Frank West, since he wasn't a part of the original Dead Rising 2. People were happy to see Frank come back to kick ass and take pictures. Capcom was so happy with how these DLCs turned out that at Captivative 2011 they announced that they were reimagining Dead Rising 2 and putting Frank West back into the spotlight. This ain't no character model swap for the game. This new version of the game brings in all new missions, areas, cutscenes and optimizations to the original, making loading time significantly faster than the original. The game also brings a new sandbox mode as well. It's off the record and off the wall. Released in 2011, Off the Record serves as a remarkable case study in video game development and player engagement, offering an intriguing twist on the traditional sequel format. Instead of advancing the storyline introduced in Dead Rising 2, Capcom Vancouver, which had taken the reins of the franchise from the original creators at Capcom Japan, opted to revisit the same setting and time frame but through the eyes of Frank West, the protagonist of the original game. This unique approach was inspired by fan demand and the developers' desire to explore what could have been if Frank West had been at the center of the Fortune City outbreak. The decision to develop Off the Record as an alternate version rather than a direct sequel allowed Capcom to creatively reimagine the narrative and gameplay elements while addressing feedback from the previous installment. By incorporating Frank's photography skills, introducing new environments, and refining the game's mechanics, Off the Record was not merely a reskin of Dead Rising 2 with a different protagonist. It was a reimagining of the game that introduced new elements while refining existing ones. By incorporating Frank West, the development team had the opportunity to reintroduce the photography mechanic, allowing players to earn additional points by capturing photos of the game's zombie-infested environments. This mechanic not only differentiated Off the Record from its predecessor, but also added depth to the gameplay, encouraging players to engage with the game world in creative ways. Capcom Vancouver invested in creating new content and making significant improvements to the game. This included the introduction of new areas such as the Uranus Zone, a vibrant theme park filled with unique weapons, deadly attractions, and hordes of zombies. The development team also focused on enhancing the game's mechanics, addressing criticisms of the original save system by implementing more forgiving save options and checkpoints. Additionally, the sandbox mode was introduced, allowing players to explore the game's world without the pressure of a ticking clock, a feature that fans had long requested. Developing Off the Record presented Capcom Vancouver with unique challenges, particularly in balancing innovation with familiarity. The team needed to ensure that the game felt new and exciting while still retaining the core elements that fans loved about the original. This balance was critical in appealing to both longtime fans and newcomers to the series. This highlights Capcom Vancouver's commitment to its fanbase, willingness to experiment with an established franchise, and ability to creatively address feedback. By taking the bold step of reimagining an existing game through a beloved character's perspective, Capcom not only enriched the Dead Rising series, but also set a precedent for how developers could engage with and respond to their communities. Off the Record's gameplay balances the familiar with the innovative, creating an experience that is both comfortable for veterans of the series and fresh enough to intrigue new players. This balance is achieved through a blend of returning mechanics from the original Dead Rising 2, the reintroduction of beloved features from the first game in the franchise, and the introduction of entirely new elements and improvements. At its core, Off the Record is once again about survival in a zombie-infested world, once again navigating the sprawling Fortune City, teeming with the undead, friendly survivors, hostile psychopaths, and hidden secrets. The open world design encourages exploration, rewarding players for venturing into dangerous areas with unique weapons, character upgrades, and story insights. Combat in Off the Record is a visceral and creative affair, thanks in large part to the game's extensive weapon crafting system. Building on the mechanic introduced in Dead Rising 2, players can once again combine a wide array of items found throughout Fortune City to create an arsenal of weapons ranging from practical to downright absurd. This system not only adds depth to the gameplay, but also encourages experimentation, allowing players to discover the most effective or entertaining ways to dispatch the zombie horde. Combat also feels more refined and responsive, thanks to the improvements in weapon handling and character movement. The feedback and physics associated with melee combat and ranged attacks were enhanced, giving weapons a more substantial and satisfying impact. Additionally, Additionally, the game introduced new combo weapons and modifications, expanding the arsenal available to players and encouraging creative approaches to zombie encounters. Also, earning money has become a lot less of a chore than it was in its predecessor, with ATMs dropping 5,000 each time and registers giving you close to $1,000. These enhancements not only made gameplay more enjoyable, but also added depth to the game's strategic elements, as players could experiment with different weapon combinations to find the most effective methods to deal with the zombie hordes. The return of the photography mechanic in Off the Record is a standout feature that not only distinguishes it from its immediate predecessor, but also reconnects the game to its roots of the original. This gameplay element, deeply associated with Frank West's character, adds layers of depth, engagement, and nostalgia, making it a pivotal aspect of the game's appeal. Incorporating photography into Off the Record serves multiple purposes. It functions as a gameplay mechanic, a narrative device, and a method of player expression. Players can use Frank's camera to capture moments of terror, absurdity, and everything in between, earning prestige points, and sometimes even trophies, based on the composition, subject matter, and timing of the photos. Players must decide when to engage in combat and when to pause and capture a moment, balancing risk and reward. This dynamic adds a unique tension to gameplay, as taking the perfect shot often requires putting Frank in harm's way. Moreover, the mechanic incentivizes exploration, as players seek out hidden, humorous, and particularly dramatic scenes to photograph, often leading to discoveries of Easter eggs, hidden items, and side missions. This mechanic encourages players to view the game world through different lenses, quite literally, as they seek out unique photo opportunities amidst the chaos. The reintroduction of photography is a callback for fans of the original Dead Rising, where the mechanic first appeared. It strengthens the connection to Frank West, whose background as a journalist was a defining trait. By bringing back this element, the developers not only pays homage to the character's origins, but also reinforces the narrative continuity within the series. Players familiar with Frank's story from the first game will appreciate the return of the mechanic as a defining aspect of his character. The character progression system in Off the Record was fine-tuned to provide a more rewarding experience. Players earn prestige points for kills, completing objectives, and taking photographs, which in turn could be used to level up Frank. With each level, players unlock new skills, increase inventory slots, and improve Frank's attributes such as speed, health, and attack power. Recognizing feedback from Dead Rising 2, Capcom implemented several enhancements to improve gameplay fluidity in Off the Record. The navigation and interaction systems were refined, making it easier for players to move through Fortune City and engage with objects and NPCs. These improvements extended to the combat system as well, with tweaks to weapon handling and movement allowing for smoother and more responsive action. These refinements helped mitigate some of the frustration points from the previous game, making Off the Record a more accessible and enjoyable experience for players of all skill levels. Another notable addition is the Uranus Zone, a vibrant and colorful theme park filled with unique attractions, deadly rides, and of course, hordes of zombies. This area stands out due to its distinct aesthetic, which contrasts sharply with the rest of Fortune City's urban sprawl and casino-dominated landscapes. The Uranus Zone offers players a fresh setting for exploration and combat, packed with new weapons, costumes, and hidden items to discover. And perhaps the most significant innovation in Off the Record is the introduction of the Sandbox mode, a game mode that removes the game's time constraints and allows players to explore Fortune City without the pressure of the main narrative's ticking clock. This mode provides a playground for experimentation and chaos, enabling players to fully engage with the game's mechanics, discover hidden secrets, and compete in challenges. Sandbox mode was a direct response to player feedback, desiring a more free-form experience, illustrating Capcom's commitment to evolving the game based on community input. The Sandbox mode represents a significant departure from the traditional Dead Rising formula by removing the time constraints that defined previous entries in the series. This mode allows players to explore Fortune City at their own pace, engaging in various activities, completing challenges, and experimenting with the game's mechanics without the pressure of the ticking clock. Sandbox mode caters more to players who wish to immerse themselves in the game world more freely, offering a playground for creativity and destruction. Within Sandbox mode, players can engage in a wide array of challenges that test their combat skills, creativity, and ability to use the environment to their advantage. These challenges add structured gameplay goals within the sandbox, offering rewards and encouraging players to explore different aspects of the game's mechanics. The mode extends the game's replayability significantly, as players can return to Fortune City again and again to set new records, discover new combinations of weapons, and simply enjoy the freedom of the open world without narrative constraints. By expanding the playable areas and introducing Sandbox mode, Off the Record not only enriched the game's content but also demonstrated an adaptive and responsive approach to game design. Capcom listened to the community and delivered features that enhanced the game's appeal and longevity, further cementing Off the Record's place as a standout entry in the Dead Rising series. These additions contributed significantly to the game's legacy, showcasing the potential for open world games to evolve and adapt to player feedback. Off the Record made strides in balancing difficulty levels to cater to a broader range of players. While the game maintained the challenging aspects that fans expected from the original title, they also toned down the difficulty a little bit, making it more
more accessible to those who might have found the standard difficulty too daunting. This inclusivity allowed more players to enjoy the game, regardless of their skill level or familiarity with the series. The game also introduced several gameplay enhancements that addressed criticisms from the previous entries and improved the overall player experience. These refinements were critical in making the game more accessible, enjoyable, and rewarding for players, demonstrating Capcom's attentiveness to feedback. One of the most significant improvements of this game is the overhaul of the save system. Previous Dead Rising titles were often criticized for their unforgiving save mechanics, which often could lead to a significant loss of progress if players were not cautious or just got unlucky. Off the Record addressed this issue by introducing more save points throughout Fortune City, as well as an autosave feature that activated after key story moments and major achievements. This change reduced frustration among players, making the game more approachable for newcomers and less daunting for veterans looking to experiment with different strategies or explore more freely without the constant fear of losing progress. The user interface and navigation systems in Off the Record received notable improvements to make exploring Fortune City a smoother experience. The map was updated for better readability, with clearer markers for objectives, points of interest, and safe houses. The in-game menu and inventory management were also streamlined, allowing players to access weapons, items, and information more efficiently. These quality of life enhancements made it easier for players to plan their movements, manage their resources, and immerse themselves in the game's world without getting bogged down by cumbersome interfaces. The storyline of Dead Rising 2 Off the Record represents a compelling blend of alternate reality storytelling, character development, and dark humor, once more setting as a backdrop of a zombie apocalypse in the fictional setting of Fortune City. By placing Frank West, the protagonist of the original Dead Rising, at the center of the events that unfolded in Dead Rising 2, Capcom created a narrative that was both familiar to the fans of the series and fresh with new twists and opportunities for exploration. Off the Record explores an alternate reality where Frank West, not Chuck Green, is the protagonist during the Fortune City outbreak. This what-if scenario allows the game to revisit the events, characters, and setting of Dead Rising 2 from a new perspective. The decision to use an alternate reality framework opens creative avenues for storytelling, enabling the developers to experiment with established narratives while staying true to the series' core themes and elements. Frank's return to the spotlight is not just a nostalgic nod to fans, it's a crucial narrative pivot that shapes the game's storyline. Following the events of the first Dead Rising, Frank West has fallen from grace. Once celebrated as a heroic photojournalist, he now seeks redemption and return to fame. The Fortune City outbreak presents him with a chance to reclaim his reputation by uncovering and exposing the truth behind the zombie epidemic. This personal motivation adds depth to Frank's character, making his journey not just a fight for survival, but a quest for personal redemption and a career resurgence. The storyline in Off the Record delves into themes of conspiracy, exploitation, and the human condition in the face of catastrophe, so just like the base game actually. As Frank uncovers the layers of deceit surrounding the outbreak, the narrative critiques the media, corporate greed, and the exploitation of tragedy for entertainment and profit. Off the Record's story starts us off with a short "Where are they now?" on Frank West. After escaping from the zombie-infested town of Willamette and breaking the story of what truly happened, Frank's career made a resurgence, but after all the hype died down, it fell back off again. That is until he sees an ad on TV for the terrorist reality zombie show being organized in Fortune City, causing Frank to sign up for it. Just like in the original version, Off the Record begins with us partaking in a bloody round of the game show. In this one, we're stuck in a ring and we must kill zombies in order to rack up points, and after collecting a swift 30 grand, we're taunted by a pair of white women. While on our way to the elevator, we notice some suspicious dealings between TK and Brandon, an optional psychopath from the original, who's now been reworked into a mandatory boss fight. After taking as many photos of the duo as humanly possible, we're accosted by a group of TK's goons. Frank might be well into his 40s at this point, but that won't stop him from absolutely wiping the floor with these guys. So after giving them each a minor severe concussion, we hop into the elevator for a cutscene that's all too familiar. This section is extremely similar to its predecessor, with the only real difference being that you can now take pictures of the ongoing carnage for some early PP. After we make it to the safe house, we're sussed out by Sullivan, who recognizes us from TV, and we don't waste much time before heading over to a nearby pharmacy in order to get our hands on some Zombrex. After dealing with the looters inside, we get the Zombrex before leading the East back to the safe house. Another handy quality of life change is that because Frank doesn't have a daughter, he can administer his Zombrex anywhere he damn pleases. I didn't notice, however, so I spent about 15 minutes standing here idle. While grabbing a cup of coffee, we watch a news broadcast hosted by Rebecca Chang, in which they show footage of Brandon, a Cure member, using the bomb that TK gave him to release the zombies that he uses for his game show, thus starting the outbreak. Stacy is of course a Cure member herself, and thus Frank is suspicious of her, but she says that Cure is being set up by a third party, so Frank heads over to the Fortune City Hotel in order to find Rebecca. While on our way, we get access to the maintenance rooms and the combo weapons. After creating our first spiked bat, I get distracted by the best get-rich-quick scheme this game has to offer. After doubling my money, I waste about half of it getting Bill to join my party. I however refuse to be poor, so go right back to farming money, and this greed actually turns out to be a pretty good choice in the end. You'll see why. After rescuing another pair of survivors, I go to the hotel to find find Rebecca, who leads us through the unfinished mall and to the security room. After we get there with plenty of time to spare, we make our way back to the safe house to get Rebecca acquainted with the rest of the crew. Sullivan tells us that we're allowed to do our investigation to try and prove Stacy and cure our innocence until the military arrives. Now, we get a pretty lengthy amount of time to mess about and do some of the available side quests to make Frank more resilient against the zombie hordes. I use this time to rescue a drunk lady, restore power to the Yucatan casino, and rescue a trio of survivors. While doing so, I also defeat Ted, a bald guy that tried to feed us to his pet tiger Snowflake. After defeating him, we're also able to find nearby stakes to heal the tiger up to full health, which makes her a companion to us. Very cool. What's not cool is that I completely forgot that she'd be treated just as any other friendly survivor, and thus I lose her about 15 minutes later. Afterwards, I go fight a man on a motorcycle, but it's not Leon this time. No, it's revealed to be none other than Chuck Green, who's gone a little crazy after failing to obtain one of the ever-elusive Zombrex doses for his daughter. Difficulty-wise, it's exactly the same as the Leon fight, so just as annoying. I then go rescue a pair of comedians and this quartet of nerds. Afterwards, I give this guy 3 grand for his painting and swiftly turn him into a zombie's accessory. Then, we see Brandon drag some girl into one of the bathrooms, so we go over there to question him about what TK put him up to. There is one slight alteration to this fight. Brandon now kicks zombies out of the toilet stalls for you to deal with. After defeating him, Stacy tells us that there's something sketchy going down in Fortune City's maintenance tunnels. After spending a decent amount of time racking up kills with the Slicycle, I head into the tunnels to see what's up. Once down there, we see a bunch of TK's goons loading some heavy duty equipment onto a train. We catch a ride and shoot our way through the mercs before having a standoff with TK himself. It's way too early to have a fight with him though, so he just detaches the train. Afterwards, I go save a paramedic, who gives us a dose of Zombex for our reward, which I instantly use on Jared in order to stop him from turning. I spend my time waiting for the next case doing the only thing I can think of, and after crossing $400,000, I go to fight Chef Antoine, and after removing him from this plane of existence, I rescue the people he was planning to use for his next soup. Next, it's time for the Randy boss fight, which I once again shamelessly cheese my way through. After dealing with him, I get this dead metal band to tag along with us to the safe house. After delivering them, I go to pick up a scantily clad woman as well as a self-proclaimed pro gamer. Frank scolds him for being too obsessed with the virtual world. He's proven correct as Eric is the first and only survivor that dies, on account of him being completely incapable of fending for himself. After putting some clothes on, we head back to the security room where we saw TK being up to no good again. Turns out he's using his own zombie apocalypse to rob all the casinos in Fortune City at a get-rich-quick scheme. However, I think there should only be one rich person in the city, so I go around killing all of his mercs and destroying all of his equipment. I then go to fight the most annoying boss in the game, save a few more survivors, and spend a long time driving around on the Slicycle to pass the time. Case 5-1 is where we see another diversion from the original story. We head over to the barbecue steakhouse to link up with Rebecca in order to meet her source, but instead it's revealed that TK has kidnapped her and is holding a ransom for the small sum of $1 million, which, as you can see, I don't have. So I've got a good amount of farming to do. I then proceed to empty out the entire Slot Ranch casino, spending about 30 minutes breaking every single slot machine I can find. After playing some more obligatory Cash Me If You Can, I beat up a mailman in order to steal more Zombrex. Then I save some rednecks from a fire of their own making before going to fight a crazed security guard with them. After dealing with the other rednecks along the ship's rooftops, I help Woodrow make a withdrawal from some of the ATMs. He then gives us a meager 5 grand for our services. Should've just let the zombies eat him. After donating some Zombrex to Jared, I go farm even more kills with the Slicycle, before finally running back to the nightclub to begrudgingly hand over $1 million. After doing so, we get surprise attacked by Amber and Crystal. This time I came prepared, however, and Crystal goes down rather fast after depositing some 12 gauge into her forehead. Afterwards, we go and complete another actually unique quest, in which you meet a clown named Evan, who turns out to be related to Adam, the clown boss from the first game. Evan is actually a pretty cool boss fight, with him walking around on stilts making it so that he can't be hit by Frank with certain weapons. He also wields the power of ice, which can both slow Frank down as well as make him slip around on the boss fight area. Afterwards, I go do the BB quest, which is long and still boring, but it rewards you with like a 150,000 PP upon completion, so it's well worth the suffering. Upon discovering that TK is trying to hightail it out of the city, we make our way to the top of the hotel in order to have a one-on-one with his chopper. Best part of this fight is that I got my $1 million back. Shame they didn't bother making a cutscene where the money doesn't get blown up though. Okay, collect a blind lady, a golf club, and a very specific plant before having a showdown with the showmen. Oh, if you can't tell by now, a majority of the side quests in this game are virtually the same as the original, just with a changed location. So it just feels like I'm rehashing my previous scripts. After saving a mother and her daughter, the military rolls into town. We all know how this goes down. Isn't it funny how they sent like 8 dudes with M4s to clean an entire city's worth of zombies? I mean, can they even physically carry enough ammo? After giving chase to the sergeant and defeating him, we carry Rebecca back to the safe house. On the way, we also recruit 2 stranded soldiers for personal protection. When we get back, TK has woken up and starts telling us about who's really behind the outbreak, but he's interrupted by a breach in the safe house. After collecting the required components to hotwire the gates, we mash it shut before discovering that TK has been bitten. It's also announced that the president has ordered a fireballing of the city. We follow the only lead that we have, which leads us down into the maintenance tunnels once more. After dealing with the mercs and scientists, we take a laptop back to the safe house, where it's revealed that Phenotrans are the ones behind the outbreak. The ending twist does diverge quite a bit from the original. In Dead Rising 2, it's revealed that Sullivan is the Phenotrans spy, but then off the record it's actually revealed to be Stacy, who starts off her betrayal by doming Rebecca and capping Sullivan, who sacrifices himself for us. It's actually quite cool how Sullivan's cutscenes can be played both from the angle of him being an actual up-to-no-good scoundrel, intentionally trying to work against and mislead our heroes, and from the angle of someone who is weary of not causing unnecessary panic amidst the other survivors. After making our way out to the street, we notice Phenotrans drop a whole bunch of Queen Harvesters so that they can keep cranking out their zombies in order to keep up with demand due to the new Fortune City outbreak. Once we destroy them, we chase after Stacy, who's sporting an entirely new outfit and hairstyle now. She does her generic villain speech and then we fight a giant crab robot thing. What a massive tone shift from the rest of the game. The boss fight has 3 phases, with each one having a few different attack moves in order to keep the player on their toes. After defeating her, she gets crushed by the monster of her own making, and Frank calls Channel 6 Action News in order to call in a rescue. The final cutscene sees us getting ambushed by a zombified DK again because I once again forgot to deliver him his Zombrex, which results in ending B. Anyone else notice my endings have been getting worse with each subsequent entry in the series? At this rate, my Dead Rising 4 review will be 4 hours of me just trying to beat this tutorial. The alternate reality storyline in Off the Record had a significant impact on the reception of the game. Fans appreciated the fresh take on the familiar setting and events, while newcomers enjoyed the engaging plot and character dynamics without needing extensive knowledge of the previous games. The narrative's blend of action, drama, and dark humor combined with Frank's West charismatic presence made Off the Record a memorable entry in the series. The storyline of Dead Rising 2 Off the Record leverages the strength of its alternate reality premise to offer players a narrative that is engaging, thought-provoking, and rich with character development. By focusing on Frank's West quest for redemption set against the backdrop of a society in crisis, the game delivers a storyline that is both entertaining and reflective, enhancing the overall impact of the Dead Rising franchise. The game stands as a testament to the potential for innovation within established franchises. By adopting an alternate reality approach, Capcom explored new narrative possibilities without detracting from the established lore of the series. The introduction of sandbox mode and gameplay enhancement demonstrated a willingness to evolve the series formula, offering players new ways to experience the zombie-infested world of Fortune City. In conclusion, Dead Rising 2 Off the Record represents a pivotal moment in the series. Its development and release illustrated the positive outcomes of listening to and engaging with the game's community, the benefits of innovative thinking and game design, and the power of narrative experimentation. The game's ability to balance the familiar with the new, to entertain and challenge its players, and to reflect on real-world issues through the lens of a zombie outbreak solidifies its legacy as a standard entry in the action-adventure genre. Dead Rising 2 Off the Record stands as a notable example of how a video game can transcend its original blueprint to offer something both familiar and refreshingly innovative. By revisiting the world of Dead Rising 2 through the eyes of Frank West, Capcom not only paid homage to the series' roots, but also pushed the boundaries of what could be expected from a sequel. This retrospective has explored the game's development, gameplay mechanics, storyline, and the impact it had on the gaming community and industry, revealing the layers of complexity and creativity that define Off the Record. From the game's inception, Capcom set out to engage with and respond to the Dead Rising community. By incorporating elements that fans longed for, such as the return of Frank West and the introduction of a sandbox mode, the developers demonstrated a commitment to player feedback that has become a model for the industry, or it used to be at least. This approach not only enriched the game's content, but also strengthened the bond between creators and players, underscoring the importance of community engagement in game development. The gameplay in Off the Record represents a careful balancing act between innovation and tradition. The return of photography, new environments like the Uranus Zone, enhanced mechanics, and the sandbox mode all contribute to a gameplay experience that is both nostalgic and novel. These elements combine to offer players a unique way to interact with the world of Fortune City, whether through the lens of a camera, the thrill of exploration, or the satisfaction of crafting the perfect weapon to combat a zombie horde. The storyline takes advantage of its alternate reality premise to delve into themes of redemption, conspiracy, and the darker sides of human nature and society. Frank's journey is not just one of survival, but also of personal and professional redemption. The narrative's exploration of these themes, coupled with dark humor and engaging character character dynamics, provides a rich backdrop to the game's action-packed gameplay. Ultimately, the impact of Dead Rising 2 off the record extends beyond its innovation and narrative depths. The game stands as a testament to the potential for video games to evolve through creative thinking. It demonstrates how developers can revisit established worlds and characters in ways that are both respectful to the original and exciting for players. In conclusion, Dead Rising 2 off the record is a vibrant mosaic of action, humor, and storytelling that highlights the strengths of the series while charting its own course. By weaving together elements of gameplay innovation, narrative exploration, and community feedback, Capcom crafted a game that not only respected its roots, but also enhances the series' legacy. Off the record remains a standard example of how to breathe new life into beloved franchises, ensuring that they continue to both captivate and engage audiences. 7 slicicles out of 10. Flashback to 2010. The big man himself, Keiji Inafune, was talking about the prospect of another Dead Rising game. He mentioned that, quote, they won't start speaking about a new game until they see the sales of Dead Rising 2, unquote. However, he did say that he liked working with Blue Castle, and he'd be willing to work with him again. Then, Dead Rising 2 off the record happens. Since Dead Rising 2 was such a banger in Capcom's eyes, they did in fact start speaking about Dead Rising 3. They mentioned that the game was going to continue the story of the previous game, and include more DLC like Case Zero and Case West from Dead Rising 2. Then, E3 2013 came along, and they revealed Dead Rising 3 to the masses. Blue Castle was back, but this time they were named Capcom Vancouver. They started by telling everyone that it was being developed on PC, so that they could pursue their vision for the series. Then this little console called the Xbox One came out, and all of a sudden Dead Rising 3 became an Xbox One exclusive launch title. Everyone was excited except for Germany, because the game couldn't make it past the ratings board, and they decided to not let the game release. And so the game launched, pulling at Dead Rising 2 by completely replacing the main character, and improving upon the game's mechanics by including more combination weapons and tightening up everything, as well as adding skin pores to all the characters. Greasy. After the game launched on Xbox in 2013, it came out on PCs a year later in 2014. Dead Rising 3's gameplay included many prominent new additions and even more updated takes on old mechanics. As the game's scope expanded, so did the map. And so the game takes place in the fictional city of Los Perdidos, California. Gone are the days of shopping malls and casinos, as we're now treated to the bustling streets of this expansive city. The city is heavily inspired by Los Angeles, and its 4 districts each have their own distinct look and feel. The first of these is Central City, the bustling downtown area. This district is filled with tall skyscrapers, luxurious hotels, and expansive shops. South Almeda is the game's industrial area, populated by factories, warehouses, the dockyard, and a construction site for a building that'll never get finished now. Next up is Sunset Hills, the more luxurious living area of the map, characterized by the many multi-million-dollar mansions found around the place. And lastly, Ingleton is the more rundown, poor neighborhood of the city, where you can find comparatively small houses and tightly lived-in apartment complexes. Each of these areas also has a variety of buildings to enter and interiors to explore. Not every building and room is accessible, but there's enough of them to make the world feel like a real lived-in place. Dead Rising 3 puts you in the shoes of yet another new character, this time being Nick Ramos, a mechanic that works at Ranchorama, a chain of garages around the city. With Nick being a mechanic, combo weapons of course make their return from the previous installments, but also, due to Nick being a mechanic, he is not restricted by not having a workbench around him, and thus he can craft a combo weapon anywhere he damn well pleases, which is a major win in my book. As I said in my Dead Rising 2 video, I loathed having to run back to the same few areas over and over, and being restricted to use what was in close proximity to them, but this completely nullifies that issue. Nick being a mechanic also widens the scale of just how insane some of these combo weapons can be, while also giving the somewhat plausible canonical explanation behind them working in-game, because you know, he's a mechanic. And he's real good at his job. Let me run through some of these insane combos. You've got some new additions like the Boom Cannon, the Chest Beam, the Defiler, the Electric Crusher, and then you've got some returning fan favorites like Knife Gloves and the Laser Sword, as well as the classic Spiked Bats, which you'll be glad to hear I barely used this time around. But regular combo weapons are just the tip of the iceberg, as Nick can also create super combo weapons. These are regular combo weapons that are juiced up to the max, and are even more potent in dealing with hordes of the undead. We've got the Ultimate Shout, a powerful ranged weapon which uses sound waves to rupture zombies' eardrums, the Ultimate Grim Reaper, a Sight Katana hybrid that shoots out fiery grenades with its heavy attack, and the Elemental Staff, another ranged weapon made up of a traffic light, a battery, and some funny chemicals. And lastly, the Massive Bomb, a throwable weapon that's essentially a nuclear warhead. That's right, Nick can just make a nuclear warhead as long as he has a grenade, a gasoline canister, a laptop, an RPG, and a microwave at his disposal. Throwing it will cause your screen to turn white and your clothes to magically disappear. But that's still not all. Nick can also combine a variety of 2 vehicles with one another in order to create combo vehicles, which are usually the better way to traverse the world, as they have a much higher health and typically have built-in turrets or rocket launchers. Also, you don't always have to find the items to craft combo weapons out in the game world. Around the map are some overrun safe houses, and after clearing the zombies inside, Both the weapons locker and the survivor board can be accessed. The weapons locker gives you access to any weapon you've previously held in your hands, including combos and super combos, and the survivor board lets you spawn and rescue survivors to aid in your fight against the undead. The game has also made getting PP a complete piece of cake, as the player now receives it for practically anything and everything they do. Firstly, you've got your side quests. These usually have you talk to a survivor, help them do a thing or retrieve an item for them, and then they'll join you in your fight against the undead, prestige points included. Then there are psychopath side quests, in which you'll go talk to a survivor, but oh no, they're actually revealed to be an unhinged maniac hellbent on stealing your life cubes. And lastly, there are survivor encounters. These ones usually have you come across some survivor that's surrounded by a group of zombies, and after dealing with them, you'll get a juicy stack of prestige. Every kill will now reward the player with a small amount of prestige, regardless of if it's with a regular weapon, combo weapon, or vehicle. The amount of prestige does differ between the bunch, with combo weapons rewarding you with the most. Aside from that, there's a prestige multiplier that gets applied once you get 10 kills, giving you double prestige, 25 kills for triple prestige, 54 quadruple prestige, and so on. All the way up to 10 times the regular rate for 1000 kills in a single combo, which becomes quite doable once you've got your hands on the right combo weapons. There's also a few human enemy types to encounter, like the biker gang and the United States military. Friendly advice, they're not here to save you. But killing isn't the only way for the player to gain prestige. The game also features a wide array of collectibles for you to collect, ranging from Frank West statues to tragic endings to CDC speakers. Finding and destroying these respectively rewards the player with a set amount of prestige that increases depending on how many you've already collected. There's also prestige trials. These are in-game challenges that require you to go to a certain place, collect a set amount of collectibles, craft a specific item a bunch of times, or kill a bunch of zombies with a specific weapon or vehicle. Some of these are good and fun, such as the zombie killing challenges. Others are a complete waste of time and should have been left on the cutting room floor, such as crafting the same combo weapon 50 damn times, which boils down to using the chapter select to load into the game, spawn whatever you need from the weapon locker to craft it 4 times, and then alt F4ing out of the game. Lastly, there's also survival training challenges, which make their return from off the records arcade mode. Once again, they require you to kill a bunch of zombies in a specific way in a set amount of time, and you'll be rewarded with a juicy stack of prestige points for your efforts. Additionally, the game features a much more expansive skill tree system in which players can choose which skill tiers to unlock, rather than just automatically getting set upgrades at specific levels. The game also has a bunch of special, rarer variants of zombies that usually wield a weapon, are stronger, have a special attack, or a combination of the above. We've got firefighter zombies who wield a fire axe, cop zombies carry firearms, prisoner zombies are larger variants that have a powerful swipe attack that can knock down the player, football zombies can sprint at the player and tackle them to the ground, and spec ops zombies are variants that carry an assault rifle. Lastly, the king zombies are the creme de la creme of variants. These guys come forward out of radiation and have the ability to enrage other nearby zombies, causing them to swarm Nick. Killing any of these special variants rewards the player with a heightened amount of prestige, usually a few hundred, or usually a few thousand in case of a king. Dead Rising 3's visual fidelity was a massive step forward from the previous entries in the franchise. Main characters looked incredibly detailed for the time, complete with the aforementioned skin pores. Hell, even the random survivors and zombies look pretty good, especially considering the fact that there's almost always over 100 of them on the screen at any given time. The streets of Los Perdidos are also appropriately post-apocalypse-y. Burning buildings, crashed cars, military blockades, and random pieces of rubble riddle the streets, adding to the overall vibe of the map. Additionally, the game renders and loads the world on an impressively fast pace. A day-to-night cycle is once again present, and once again makes zombies more aggressive towards the player and their survivors' posse. At launch, the ambition to have thousands of zombies on screen at the same time did come with some performance issues, but those have been fixed through various patches and performance updates. And after having played it recently, I can happily say this game runs smooth like butter. Additionally, Dead Rising 3's loading times are greatly decreased from previous installments in the series. Gone are the days of having to wait for 10 to 15 seconds every time you enter or exit a casino. Hell, there's not even a stutter or freeze frame when traveling between the different districts of the city. Dead Rising 3 once again expands the scope of its story by having it take place in an entire city, instead of one's closed off shopping mall or two's luxurious resort. The game takes place 10 years after the Fortune City outbreak, tying it back to the overarching plot of the franchise, while still letting the story unfold on its own. The base story beats are once again quite similar to previous games. Nick and the other survivors are trapped inside of a quarantine zone in the middle of a zombie outbreak, and they must find their way out before it gets completely wiped off the map by a military firebombing. This game's narrative takes itself way more serious than any other in the franchise too, being reflected in the more toned down, dull color palettes.
Dead Rising 3 starts off with a short summary on how the Los Perdidos outbreak started, and just how quickly the city was put into total lockdown. We catch up with Nick after he's failed to find a way out of the city, and now he's on his way back to a nearby diner in order to meet up with a group of other survivors. I get told how to restore health and how to perform light and heavy attacks. After making our way through the overrun military checkpoint, Nick witnesses a plane crash and we get hit with the title card. Afterwards, I make my way across this literal highway of death, which is a great showcase of what this engine is truly capable of. There's fire everywhere, zombies galore, and a never-ending bombardment of exploding cars. After a little, we make it to the diner in order to meet up with our friends, including Annie, Rhonda, Dick, and 2 other characters that suspiciously don't have a name. The 2 nameless characters die almost instantly, very surprising. We craft our very first combo weapon before hopping in an SUV and driving down to Rhonda's garage in Ingleton. Once we arrive, the gang tries getting the TV working, but Rhonda tells us it'll take at least a couple of hours in order to fix it, leaving us with some time to explore the surrounding area. On our way out, we scavenge a phone from a ZDC agent and are contacted by a guy that calls himself Jamie Flint. He's holed up inside a surveillance room, and thus he'll be contacting us whenever he sees survivors in the city that need help. The first side quest brings us to the Zen Garden, wherein I meet Z, a wrathful man hell-bent on killing anyone that disturbs a piece of his garden. After defeating him, we travel over to a nearby motel where we meet a girl called Anna who asks us to collect some spray paint. After collecting and handing them back to her, we return to Rhonda's garage, where we catch a news broadcast, announcing that the US military will be firebombing the city in 6 days' time. So we're on the clock now, and now we must get our asses out of it before we're turned into a human-sized bucket of KFC. After creating our first combo vehicle, we hop in our newly created armored turret rig and drive over to a nearby military checkpoint. Upon arriving, however, it's revealed that there won't be any evacuations anymore for the time being, as it's now being controlled by a bloodthirsty gang of maybe racist bikers. After dealing with a bunch of low-rank cronies, we get confronted by the leader of the gang, who's driving the Roller Hog, also known as objectively the best vehicle in the game. We beat the absolute snot out of him and cause him to drive into a nearby fuel tanker, atomizing him instantly. On our way out of the checkpoint, we get attacked by a soldier who instantly opens fire on us. Nick, however, recognizes him as an old friend, Diego. He tells us that there's a plane stored in a hangar nearby. While handing Nick the key, Diego drops it. Nick reaches down to grab it but is unfortunately bitten and infected by a zombie. How unfortunate. This means I'll have to get my hands on some Zombrex, or I won't even make it to the end of the week. Rhonda tells Nick the nearby crematorium should have a stock of Zombrex in case of emergencies. After making our way through the sewers, we arrive at the crematorium and come across a guy called Gary, who's also looking to break into the place. After making our way through the skylights, we let Gary in, and then clear out the church area before going down to cold storage. Once in the morgue, Gary tells us to find the corpse of Nicole White, who Gary's boss is looking for. After finding it, we discover the locker is empty. Gary finds her in the other room. Nick notices she looks extremely similar to Annie. There's also no Zombrex to be found, but turns out it's not an issue, as Nick's wound is mysteriously healing itself. Gary tasks us with driving Nicole's corpse over to a nearby club, where his boss is hiding out. After a bit, it's revealed that Nicole isn't the girl Gary's boss was looking for, and Gary asks us to bring Annie instead, given that she and Nicole look similar. Nick, however, has no clue of Annie's current whereabouts, so we meet up with our friends again. Once I arrive at the hangar, Dick points out that both Nick and Diego have a number tattooed on their necks, with Nick remarking they've had it for as long as they can remember. Rhonda tells us where we can find Annie's group, who we can use to trade for fuel. I travel to their Sunset Hills hideout and meet a lady named Lauren, who refuses to let us in until we collect her tattoo kit and her wedding ring. After collecting them, we return to Lauren, and she lets us into the outpost. We have a chat with Annie, Red, and Doug, and Red tasks us with destroying some government property in order to stop them from spying on us. So I shoot some cameras, sabotage a pair of satellite relays, and burn some military supplies. While on our way to the last set of supplies, we get ambushed by an entrepreneurial doctor, who's taken the apocalypse as an opportunity to harvest some organs. This is a pretty fun boss fight, to be honest, as the game tasks you with taking out the real Albert. There's about a dozen walking around this hideout at all times, as Nick is currently tripping the fuck out on drugs. After defeating him, we save his hostage, and literally make a crate explode with our bare hands. Then we retrieve our gear and return to the comm tower. I travel to the nearby police station in order to get my hands on some incriminating evidence against the military, who've been indiscriminately executing civilians. Matter of fact, they're doing it right now. I chase the police sergeant through the station, killing zombies and special forces along the way until we get to the top floor, where we face off against the sex-crazed dominatrix. After defeating her, I body slam her out of a window and retrieve the USB drive. Afterwards, we travel to a hotel in order to save Angel along with Red and Annie, but Angel's already dead. I'm then allowed to muck about for a bit while waiting on Red to collect the fuel for us. Once I get back to the comm tower, Gary ambushes the group to kidnap Annie, but all of us are in turn ambushed by the special forces, who decide to take Annie, Gary, and a couple of others. I then travel to a taxi depot that's been turned into a military compound. After sneaking into the place, we see Marion, the main villain of Case West, order her goons to forcefully infect the President of the United States. This way, General Hemlock, the main orchestrator of the outbreak, can have a straight shot for the presidency. After destroying the generators, I help the captives escape, but not before defeating the Spec Ops commander, who holds the keycard to the gate. After prying it from his cold, dead hands, we unlock the gate, and Red confronts us about a poster, advertising that the military is willing to pay big bucks for anyone that's captured with a numerical tattoo on their neck. The plot thickens. I head down to Central Storage in order to retrieve a car loaded with fuel for the plane. While doing so, I uncover one of those fancy mutated king zombies. After carefully driving back to the hangar with it, Rhonda tells us that Diego had a borderline schizophrenic breakdown and ran off to the museum of Central City. I chase Diego around the museum exhibits a little before coming face to face with him. However, he's still tweaking out, so I'll have to beat some sense into him, and after doing so, he shows us the zombie exhibits, including one which says a zombie with the number 4 tattooed on his neck started a different outbreak, causing both Nick and Diego to freak out. He also tells us that he got mugged by the bikers on his way to the museum, so now we must retrieve the plane keys from them. So I find the bikers, wipe them off the face of the earth and return Diego to the hangar. After doing so, Rhonda tells me that she'll need some time to find a place that holds the replacement parts for the plane. So I muck about for a bit longer, kill some zombies, save some survivors, kill a roided up Giga Chad, you know, the usual. I'm then told that there used to be a collector of antique planes living in the city. After dealing with the alarm and the zombies inside of the mansion, we collect the rudder arm and the flywheel, before heading over to a nearby garage in order to collect the last piece. I then return to the airplane, and after Rhonda fixes it, we are once again ambushed by the military. Nick and Diego awaken to find themselves trapped to operating chairs, where it will be experimented on, under the supervision of Marion. The experiment goes horribly wrong, however, and Diego is killed in the process. I then come across Isabella Keys, who Nick is less than happy to see. She says she can explain everything, however, but Marion separates us via metal gate and tries to kill us with metallic loaders. After dealing with them, I escape from the lab and end up in the riverbed. I fight my way through it and the train station before dealing with a warm welcome from the bikers before making my way over to the karaoke bar in order to rescue Annie. But Gary won't let us through. He tells us to either find his ex or go through him. I attempt to go through him, but he's surprisingly adept at tanking a sledgehammer to the face, so I opt to retrieve his ex-wife instead, who happens to be Rhonda. I find Rhonda at her garage in a pretty bad shape, as the military tortured her by removing one of her arms. Quite unfortunate. I collect the first aid kit to stop the bleeding, along with some other tools in order to give her a kick-ass mechanical arm. Even shoots fire. What the fuck kind of mechanic are you, Nick? I bring Rhonda back to Gary, and he lets us inside of the bar as a reward. After dealing with the zombies, I untie Annie, and after doing so, she tells us that she is in fact currently single. That's literally what she says in the cutscene, by the way. I bring her back to the plane, and Isabella finally spills the beans on why we're immune. Back before the first game, Carlito infected 50 orphans and sent them all over the US in order to randomly start outbreaks, like ticking time bombs. It however turns out that he made one of them immune to the virus, number 12, which happens to be Nick. How did he personally manage to make a cure? It's never explained. Fucking deal with it. Red then betrays the rest of the gang in order to get his hands on $5 million, as that's what the military are offering for Nick's head. After destroying the crane and defeating Red in combat, I free the rest of the gang, and Nick and Annie finally embrace one another. Evan then pulls up with Rhonda, Gary, and a familiar voice, who is revealed to be Chuck motherfucking Green. Turns out Annie is actually Katie, who's been using her second name to live in secret. Nick, Chuck, Annie, Isabella, and Dick then board the plane, with Rhonda and Gary staying behind because there's not enough space on board, which is complete bullshit because there's definitely some empty seats in the back right there. Then we fly off into the credits, before being interrupted by the franchise's signature overtime chapter. Hemlock will be flying around the city, using drones to collect king zombies for his nefarious harvesting scheme, as he wants to completely purge all of Earth's people, without destroying any of the infrastructure. But before he starts any of his collecting, he promptly tosses Marion off a building. We then race around the city from hotspot to hotspot, killing zombies and destroying harvesting drones. And after destroying enough of them, Nick heroically leaps onto one of the drones, stowing away on Hemlock's ship. I ambush them in the cockpit, causing the plane to crash on top of the museum, and have a showdown with Hemlock. After defeating him, the credits truly roll with the usual post-game story. It turns out they did actually use Nick's blood to synthesize a permanent cure for the zombie disease, meaning that there were no other games made in the franchise. There's even a post-credit scene, which reveals that Isabella was actually the one that started the Los Perdidos outbreak, in order to root out the immune orphan, as she wants full and sole credit for making the cure, and to clear her family name after Carlito tarnished it. Isabella then smashes the laptop that holds the recording, wiping it from history. Now this was ending S of course, and there's an additional 4 endings that you could get in your playthrough. Ending C, in which you do manage to kill Gary at the karaoke bar instead of bringing Rhonda to him, after which you attempt to take off in the plane, but due to the faulty parts, it stalls and the group gets surrounded by zombies. Ending D, in which you go to the plane on your own instead of going to the karaoke bar, attempting to leave everyone behind before being caught red-handed and left to die in Los Perdidos. And ending F, in which you simply run out of time. You can also fail in stopping Hemlock from collecting enough of the King zombies in overtime, in which the city also just gets firebombed. There's also an unused ending X, in which Nick likely killed more than a few survivors along the way, as he's ambushed by a group of them after defeating Red. Overall, it's a serviceable story, and even though there's quite a few conveniences, I still really enjoy my time with it anytime I do a playthrough of it. You really feel Nick power up over the course of the story, as he turns from a humble mechanic to a hardened badass, practically capable of dealing with entire hordes of zombies with just his bare hands, as he strives to uncover the truth behind the outbreak, all the while saving whoever he can. But Capcom didn't just deliver a main story and call it a day, as they got to work on 4 additional short stories in the form of The Untold Stories of Los Perdidos. These take the shape in 4 episodes, each centering around a different minor character from the main story, focusing on their perspective on the outbreak and their struggle for survival. These DLCs add an honestly appreciated amount of backstory to, in some cases, entirely nameless characters, retroactively enriching the main storyline by filling in background details and exploring lives of some different survivors. The first episode is Operation Broken Eagle, which revolves around the previously unnamed commander of the Special Forces, Adam Kane. Kane's story provides a more militaristic perspective on the outbreak, as you get dropped into the city only a few hours after it's been deemed a quarantine zone. Kane's primary mission once on the ground is to establish a safe zone for the Spec Ops, as well as to locate the President, who was in the city during the start of the outbreak. Each DLC also adds an additional set or sets of collectibles, exclusive to their specific characters. ZDC cameras, which Kane can hack to give the military more eyes around the city, dog tags, which Kane can scavenge from his former squad mates, and safe houses, which Kane can infect using a bioweapon. These are also the same safe houses we can clear out as Nick in the main game, so there's a nice bit of continuity here. This DLC starts off with Kane and his squad flying into Los Perdidos, before being promptly shot down by a pair of bikers. I make my way out of the riverbed, through the metro station, and deal with the President's forces waiting on us outside. I head over to the crash site of the helicopter and collect our precious cargo, which is revealed to be a larva container that we'll use to infect the safe houses. After collecting it, I'm told to clear out the nearby taxi company in order to set up a base for the other Spec Ops squadrons. I clear out the perimeter and the Bravo unit rolls in, but then I'm told to locate Charlie units, who we've lost contact with. Once I arrive at their last known location, I discover they've all been turned into flesh eaters, but they did leave us a handy toy. After driving it back to base, I'm told to investigate the stage where the President was giving a speech as the outbreak started. I investigate the stage and track the President to some swanky mansion in Sunset Hills, and after dealing with the last of our forces, we take her back to base camp. Once back, Kane gets orders to destroy the black box, as it contains incriminating evidence against Hemlock and the rest of the Spec Ops. Kane's interrupted by a zombified President though, being turned by Marion. This seemingly changed something in Kane's morals, as he lies to command about destroying the black box before going out to fight Nick, who's broken into the camp to free the rest of the survivors. Overall, I quite like this first DLC. Kane, as a character, is a stark contrast to Nick from the main game, as he, up until the ending, is completely subordinate to his higher-ups in terms of blindly following orders, regardless of the moral ethics behind them. The second episode is Fallen Angel, which revolves around Angel Cajano, a member of the group of illegals that Nick closely works with to thwart the government's efforts throughout the story. This DLC adds another 3 types of collectibles exclusive to Angel: ZDC posters, which Angel can burn using fire or acid-based weaponry, surveillance cameras, which Angel can destroy, and medkits, which she can collect for the other survivors. And lastly, about halfway through the DLC, she can also save groups of survivors from the Spec Ops. The DLC starts off with Angel being awoken from a drunken slumber by Doug. She's taken quite hard to the outbreak and has started binge drinking to cope with all the death. He tasks us with investigating a nearby yacht that recently crashed into the shore of Central City. I ransack it for supplies before heading to a nearby safe zone. Once I arrive, I find it looking more like a mass grave. After finding some clues, I chase the sole survivor around for a little. She tells us that it was the Spec Ops that raided the hideouts, and now they're on their way to the high school. Once I arrive back at the school, I help Doug fend off the assault, before making my way towards the nearby comms tower and clearing it of zombies to establish a new safe zone for our group. Afterwards, I go to collect the food truck, as well as collect some military caches. Finally, I go ambush a group of Spec Ops at the police station together with Doug, and after interrogating the last soldier, I go rescue the rest of the survivors from a storage facility, but it's revealed that they're watching us on cameras, so Angel sets up a ruse in order to misdirect the Spec Ops to the Central City Hotel, rather than the comms tower. where she has a heroic final stand. I quite enjoyed Angel's DLC and her heroic quest for redemption as she fights to protect her fellow survivors from both the zombie threat and the government forces. The third episode is Chaos Rising, which revolves around the previously unnamed leader of the biker gang, Hunter Thibodeau, as he seeks revenge on the other bikers that betrayed him, landing him in jail. This DLC adds some desperately needed backstory to Hunter, who was in my opinion one of the coolest looking bosses the main story had to offer. It explores the darker underbelly of the city, dealing with gang conflicts, betrayal, and Hunter's quest for revenge at the center of it. Hunter can collect bottles of his favorite whiskey and destroy emergency phones. He can also fetch custom bikes for Torque, the gang's previous leader. This DLC starts off with Hunter behind bars, betrayed by his former friends. After escaping from my cell, I head up to the top floor in order to collect the key for the station's garage. I steal a police cruiser before heading over to production bridge in order to regroup with the rest of the gang, but once I get there, it's revealed that Torque is no longer the leader, as he's been forced out by Spider, the same scum that ratted us out. He won't let us in without giving him an offering of sorts, so I head to a nearby liquor store in order to collect a bottle of whiskey. Once I return with the whiskey, we get double crossed by Spider and his 3 lieutenants. After dealing with a group of bikers, Spider puts a cap on our ass and disposes of us in some nearby dumpster. After patching myself up, I head over to Torque's bike shop, who offers to build us a custom bike in order to help us defeat Spider's lieutenants, but he'll need parts for it. So I collect a trio of bikes from around the city. After waiting around for a bit, I pick up Torque's new machine of death, which turns out to be this bike capable of shooting saw blades. It's also terribly loud and makes my ears bleed. I then go around the entire city and cross off Razorface, Snake, and Cannons before returning to Torque's shop. Once I arrive, I find it trashed and Torque mortally wounded, but before he passes on, he hands us one last gift, the Roller Hog. After collecting it, I go confront Spider, taking him on in one-on-one combat, and his hands prove to be no match for my Sledgehammer Axe combo. After giving him a quick shave, the rest of the gang pledges their loyalty to Hunter, but the celebrations are cut short when someone calls out 2 survivors approaching the compound. Overall, I quite like this DLC. I quite like this game, if you can tell. And the grittier look at the societal breakdown caused by the outbreak. And lastly, the 4th episode is The Last Agent, which revolves around Brad Park, a ZDC agent who slowly uncovers the truth behind the outbreak and is torn between his own personal morals and loyalty to the badge. Brad, just like all other protags, has his own set of collectibles to acquire. These range from collecting malfunctioning ZDC chips, bootleg Zombrex, burning piles of corpses, as well as rescuing survivors. This DLC starts off with Brad hanging on for dear life as his implanted ZDC chip has stopped working and thus he needs Zombrex. Luckily enough, Nick comes by and he begrudgingly injects him with a dose while telling him how disappointed he is in the ZDC's actions, starting Brad's quest for the truth. I head over to a nearby depot and collect a van filled with Zombrex for the survivors holdout in the city's hospital. After talking to the doctor outside, she tells us to collect some chips from nearby king zombies, and after doing so, I return to the hospital. Once back, I deal with a group of bankers attacking some survivors, before returning and dealing with the ones attacking the hospital. But I'm informed that they blew up the van with Zombrex, so we're right back to square one. But Brad knows of a black market Zombrex operation in Ingleton, so I head there to collect some of it. After returning to the hospital again, Cora reveals to us that all the chips were turned off manually in order to start the outbreak, and she tells us to meet a guy called Nelson, who should be able to help us. After helping him deal with his mild zombie problem, I give him some Zombrex, and he asks us to retrieve some equipment to diagnose the issue with the chips. Once I collect a thingamajig from the helicopter and some computer parts, I take Nelson to a control room to allow him to work on the issue, and wait around for a bit before returning to Nelson, who says there's a military frequency deliberately jamming communications around the city in order to screw over the ZDC. After getting to the source and dealing with the nearby spec ops, I investigate the servers, which reveal the location of another military lab in the city. Once I get there, it's revealed to be the lab where Diego met his untimely demise. Brad then discovers a laptop that holds coordinates to a prison camp at the taxi company, and he decides to cut out the ZDC chip in his neck, as keeping it in place just allows the military to track his every move. Once I get to the camp, I find Adam Kane, desperately clinging on to life after being beaten to a pulp by Nick. Kane tells Brad that Hemlock killed the president, and hands him the military chopper's black box in order to expose the true perpetrators behind the outbreak. Once I return to the hospital, I collect all the survivors for extraction before driving over to the comms tower to pick up even more, including Gary and Rhonda. Nice wrapping up of that loose end. I then make a final stop to collect Nelson, before driving all of them over to the Dilly Diner, where Nick's story started all these hours ago. We head up to the roof, and get all the survivors onto a chopper before flying out of the city, mere hours before the firebombing occurs. Brad's story is a neat bow to tie off the chronological chronological story of Dead Rising 3, as it doesn't leave much open for questioning after everything's said and done. Each of these DLCs adds to the depth and breadth of the overall narrative, providing a new gameplay experience focusing on different aspects of the survivors, from military operations to civilian resistance, to gang warfare and conspiratorial investigations. The untold stories add an appreciated amount of additional content to the story, offering players varied perspectives on the outbreak that complement and enhance the main storyline. On release, Dead Rising 3 was praised for the expansive open world available for players to explore, dense crowds of zombies, and the sheer level of freedom it offered for players to approach combat and exploration in whatever way they saw fit. Review outlets particularly lauded the reworked crafting system, which allowed for a higher amount of creativity in weapon and vehicle combinations. The apocalyptic setting mixed with the humorous bits of comedic relief was met with mixed reception, but was generally seen as a natural evolution on the series' prior entries. The game was not without fair criticism, however, as some pointed out the inconsistent frame rates, and occasional bugs or glitches that bogged down the experience on Xbox One. The narrative and character writing were also noted to be weaker elements of the game, with some finding the story to lack depth compared to the game world, which was rich with interactivity. Dead Rising 3 significantly impacted how open world games could handle large-scale numbers of NPCs on screen without noticeable losses in performance. This technical achievement demonstrated the capabilities of 8th generation consoles at the time, and influenced how developers would approach crowd simulation and large-scale battles as a whole. Within the scope of Dead Rising, this installment is often credited with transitioning the franchise into a more narrative-focused and technologically advanced era. It expanded its audience by making the game much more approachable to newcomers, due to its more forgiving time-limit mechanics, while still returning it for long-term fans of the franchise. Even years after its release, Dead Rising 3 is a game I continue to go back to for more mindless zombie slaying. It showcased the sheer potential of new console tech at the time, and set new standards for interactive and immersive gameplay. Looking back, it's clear that Dead Rising 3 wasn't just another sequel in a popular franchise. It was a landmark title that made waves ripple across the game development scene, and left a lasting impression on the industry. Its legacy is a testament to the innovative minds of the creators, and the enduring appeal of its gameplay. 8 blueprints out of 10. And there you have it, the full autopsy of Dead Rising 3, dissected a decade after its first hit on screens. For those of you that played it back when it came out, I hope this retrospective reignites some of that initial adrenaline, and for those of you who've never experienced it, perhaps now you'll be intrigued enough to give it a spin. Dead Rising burst into the scene the same way I burst a blood vessel in my head when I played Trials Fusion. I'm really bad at this game, okay? The original offered players a sandbox full of zombies, a truly expansive arsenal of weapons, and an ever-present ticking clock that added a real sense of urgency. Frank West, our war-covering photojournalist, became an instant fan favorite, not just for his ability to wield anything from a chainsaw to a park bench with lethal efficiency, but also because he was just a regular dude thrown into a chaotic situation. Fast forward to 2016, and Frank West is back for round 2, 3 technically, with Dead Rising 4. We've returned to Willamette, the site of the original outbreak, but this isn't the same mall we got our hands dirty in for the first time. The iconic mall has had quite the facelift, now having been expanded to be a sprawling, modernized megaplex decked out for the holiday season. Not just that, we can also leave the mall and explore Willamette and its surrounding areas too. On paper, it sounds like a true match made in heaven, but the game made some big changes to the established formula, and not many of them went over well with the fans, from the removal of the series' signature timer to the overhaul of Frank West himself. I've always thought to myself, well, why don't they do it again? And then ruin just about everything else. Luckily, I'm secretly a wizard, and Dead Rising 4 is the spell I cast on Capcom to deliver just that. So let's take a closer look at what Dead Rising 4 brought to the crafting bench, and where it may have lost its way. Let's go back to 2014, which was 10 years ago. Oh, I don't want to think about that. Dead Rising 3 did well, and Capcom was wondering if they should make another game, but the world was caught up in the whole reboot craze. And if Sony can just remake a game that's 9 years old, what's stopping Capcom from making a reboot of a game that came out 10 years ago? Well, that's what Capcom set out to do. Originally, Dead Rising 4 was going to be a reboot, and was codenamed Climber. Capcom saw how well the original Last of Us did, and they wanted to jump in on that third-person narrative storytelling, instead using their own zombie IP, Dead Rising. However, Capcom Japan wasn't having it, and they wanted a new Dead Rising game, one that continued the story of Frank West, since everyone loves him so much. So, Climber was scrapped in 2014 and work on what we now know as Dead Rising 4 began. They brought back Frank, but as a grumpy shell of his former self, and they also replaced his voice actor, swapping Terrence J. Rotolo for Ty Olsson, which the fans didn't take too kindly to. Fans broke out the big guns and started a petition. Yeah, that worked out great, didn't it? Anyway, with the series supposedly returning to its roots, did Capcom manage to woo the fans with the new game? Or is Frank's second trip to Willamette going to turn out to be worse than his first? When a return to Willamette was on the cards, the idea had fans buzzing with excitement. After all, that's where this wacky adventure began. The quintessential American town turned into the setting for one of the most iconic zombie games in history, as the original turned the mundane setting of a suburban shopping mall into an expansive sandbox where players were free to explore and turn anything they could get their hands on into a weapon. So naturally, the prospect of revisiting this location was a tantalizing one. But as you'll soon find out, you can't ever go home again. Not really. Willamette, in spite of its enlarged scale, is like a shadow of its former self, wrapped in some holiday cheer and stripped of any charm or tension that made the original so engaging. Sure, the town has grown, but the heart and soul of Willamette, that sense of claustrophobia, is gone as you navigated the mall's narrow corridors. The new mall is massive and too expansive to feel like a desperate struggle for survival, and more like a festive playground without any real stakes. The Christmas theme, while visually interesting, feels at odds with the tone of the series. I mean, I'm as much of a sucker for snow as the next guy, and Dead Rising has always had a certain level of absurdity, but it was also balanced with a sense of urgency. So, let's start with the most controversial change. The series' signature timer mechanic is entirely absent from this game. Turns out adding a timer like this is actually pretty challenging, as adding this requires a lot of playtesting by people of various skill, then figuring out the average time to beat the story, and then adding some additional time in order to let people explore the world, craft weapons, and do side content. It forced you to prioritize, to make tough decisions on the fly, and to live with the consequences of them. Do you save a survivor from a horde of zombies, or pretend you don't hear their screams of agony and mosey on down to the next main mission? So, the timer is gone, and with it, much of the tension that set the earlier games apart from the other horde of undead sandboxes. Now you can mindlessly wander through Willamette at your own pace, take in the sights, kill zombies, and loot stores without a care in the world. On the surface, it may seem like a good thing, as it makes the game more accessible, but what it really ended up doing is strip away a layer of depth. Without the constant pressure of the clock, the weight of every decision, and the cost of every mistake is largely nullified in order to appeal to a more casual audience. And unfortunately, this is just the first of many in a long line of baffling gameplay changes. Let's talk combat, and the absolute nerfing of everything to do with it. Combat while controlling Frank honestly feels like you're hitting enemies with the equivalent of a wet paper towel. Most standard weapons, and hell, even some of the combo weapons, are no longer capable of performing one-shot kills. The kill combo counter has been replaced by a hit combo counter, and locked behind it are any weapon's heavy attack, greatly reducing the depth of combat, as you're no longer able to string together different attacks, until the game allows you to at least. The combo weapon system has also been changed. In previous entries, you needed 2 specific items, unless you unlocked the skills in Dead Rising 3, which allowed you to craft groups of weapons with items from specific types. For example, if you wanted to create the Pummel Blast, a sledgehammer with grenades at the end, you'd need a sledgehammer and a grenade initially. But if you bought the combo skill, you could craft it with any given blunt weapon and explosive. Dead Rising 4 lets you craft every combo weapon in the game with only half the items. So, to craft the Pummel Blast here, you'd need the sledgehammer and then any given explosive item. No skill required. This greatly reduces the difficulty of crafting, especially in the early game. Talking about combo weapons, they're back, and they're as weak as ever. They are half returning ones, accordingly nerfed and less fun as a result, and half new. These new ones are almost all Christmas themed too. And despite having 3 games to draw inspiration from, or hell, even straight up copy, Dead Rising 4 features 55 combo weapons. And as a reference, Dead Rising 3 had 105 of them. Seriously, I don't know what they did, but even after grinding all the way up to level 80, they still barely deal any damage, only being able to kill 2 to 3 zombies a hit. This greatly reduces the main drive of grinding for skill points, and leveling up as a whole in my opinion, as it never feels like Frank is getting any stronger in the long run, so why the fuck would I spend another 10 hours getting Frank to level 100? Oh yeah, that's right. The max level is now 100, for seemingly no other reason than to allow for this awfully bloated skill tree. Dead Rising 4's skill tree features 4 different branches for players to invest in. Brawling focuses on melee combat, increasing the odds of getting critical hits, and increasing the durability of both weapons and vehicles. Fortitude focuses on Frank's health and damage resistance, increasing his total health, the amount of health he regains from eating, and reducing the amount of damage you take from attacks. Shooting focuses on ranged weapons, such as increasing the chance of getting critical hits, increasing total ammunition, or, and I quote, greatly increasing the chance of getting critical hits. Real creative there, fellas. And lastly, survival focuses on Frank's resourcefulness, like increasing inventory space, giving Frank better sneaking, and increasing the amount of scrap retrieved from searchable objects. 107 different skills to unlock, and only about a quarter of them actually have any meaningful gameplay changes. This feels an awful lot like they tried to RPGify the franchise, with negligible stat boosts for most of these skills. Dead Rising 3's skill tree expansion was great, as you really felt Nick get stronger throughout the course of the game, while in this one, you just don't. Frank remains the same grumpy boomer he starts the game out as. He is however capable of carrying a metric shit ton of items, as he has 4 different inventories to choose from. Inventory management? Nah, that's way too confusing for me, as Frank can now carry up to 32 items at once. Gone are the days of inventory management, just mindlessly hoard anything you can get your hands on. The expanded inventory system significantly reduces the difficulty of inventory management compared to the previous entries in the series, as Frank can now have up to 8 slots for melee, ranged and thrown weapons, as well as 8 food items. While it is true that this gives players much more leniency, I can't help but feel this is just removing yet another hallmark of the franchise. In earlier entries, the limited inventory forced players to think about their loadout, balancing between weapons and life-saving healing items. This added a layer of strategy to the game, as players had to alter the contents of their inventory to whatever situation they found themselves in at the time. By contrast, 4 allowed players to carry a whole lot of everything without any restrictions, which diminishes tension, strategy and resource management as a whole. The expanded inventory makes it easier to prepare for any situation, but it also means the sense of resource scarcity and the critical thinking that came along with it are entirely absent. The ways to get prestige points have also been completely gutted. In spite of having to go through double the amount of levels to hit the cap now, zombie kills now reward 10 points for all weapon types. Vehicular kills now reward you with 2 points. 2 fucking 2! There's barely even a point in using them anymore, but we'll get to those Beyblade fucks in a minute, just you wait. Aside from regular zombies, there's also 2 variants to encounter. Fresh zombies, which are fast and can tackle you with little to no warning, sometimes from outside of your view, and Evo zombies, that have more health and are the right pain to deal with. Side quests? Oh you fool, they're completely gone. Survivor boards also went up in smoke because of this. There are some random encounters for you to complete, which always spawn in the same set locations. These range from saving a survivor from a group of zombies, to saving a survivor from a group of soldiers. Upon saving the survivor, you'll get some prestige, a combo weapon, and maybe some scrap. Afterwards, they'll just aimlessly stand around in a safe house. Saving a set amount of survivors will also level up the corresponding safe house, and each new level unlocks some new items at the vendors inside. Aside from zombies, there's 2 other enemy types. Hostile survivors, who've been diagnosed with a case of the crazies after realizing they're indeed part of Dead Rising 4. And Obscurus Forces, who've been diagnosed with generic military faction syndrome number 177,392. Psychopaths return in the form of yet another hollow shell of themselves, now dubbed Maniacs. I suppose Capcom received too many mean letters from federal prisons. These entirely optional boss fights now come with all the cringe and none of the charm of the previous entries in the series. What made the psychopaths so good in the other games is the fact that they were fleshed out characters with tragic backstories and motivations, whether it be greed, fear or vanity. Hell, in most cases, they were good people caught in a bad situation. Adam the Clown became a psychopath after witnessing his circus fall apart due to the outbreak. Cliff the Vietnam War veteran lost his mind after witnessing his family die in the outbreak. And Ted just wanted to feed his damn tiger. Dead Rising 3 alone blows this game's maniacs out of the water. 3 had you get chased around by a comically obese woman on a mobility scooter inside of a restaurant because you dared asking if you could take some of her food. 4 is a guy that's dressed up like Santa, and he kills people. 3 had you fight a gimp fanatic that attacked you with a golden flamethrower in the shape of his cock. Oh no! 4 has a guy that's dressed like a pirate captain, and he kills people. 3 has you haul ass around a massive mansion to disable security measures, while taking out gun-toting drones, and when confronting the guy in the basement, he gets a heart attack, shits himself, and dies. 4 is a guy that's dressed like a turkey. Oh, and he kills people. Can you notice the theme here? Dead Rising 4 genuinely just feels like the devs got a slap on the wrist by the publisher after 3. Like they were having too much fun, so they had to dial everything way the fuck back. Everything feels weaker, certain combo weapons don't even do one-shot kills sometimes, and whatever they tried adding in to make it more fun ended up falling flat on its face. Like the exosuits for example, another new addition. These robotic upgrades make Frank a human tank for all of 90 seconds, after which it spontaneously breaks. Wouldn't want to catch you having too much fun now, would we? Combo vehicles also make their return, but they too have been absolutely nerfed into oblivion. They're less fun to make, are not as efficient at dispatching hordes of the undead, are prone to breaking, and I don't know if it's because of all the snow on the roads, but vehicles handle the same way this sound effect sounds. Additionally, there's only 8 of them in the game, and even less of them are actually worth using. Further evidence of the no fun allowed policy, I suppose. Cars will randomly launch into the air, turn into a Beyblade, or straight up just get flung across town. What the fuck, man? I just fucking flew across town, bro. I swear, man, this game is a fucking social experiment designed to test my fucking patience. This happens for every single vehicle in the game. Now not to this extent, usually, but still enough for me to get persistently annoyed by it. Each vehicle now has a health bar, though you'll most likely be flipped over long before reaching the end of it. Weapon lockers also have been completely removed, but hey, now you can use an out-of-place currency to buy whatever you need from the safe houses. Isn't this fun? No! Dead Rising 4's narrative attempts to revisit some of the original's most iconic elements while introducing new twists and characters, but whether it comes together in a satisfying way is definitely up for debate. Let's start with the main man himself, Frank West. Fans hearing Frank could potentially return was exciting to say the least, as he's been the face of the franchise since its inception. But this Frank is no longer the grizzled veteran we came to know and love, as he's more cynical, more sarcastic, and more, well, meta. He's constantly cracking jokes, breaking the fourth wall, and snapping selfies with zombies, because that's a thing now. It's a Frank that's been updated for the age of social media, but in the process, he's definitely lost some of the depth that made him relatable. Changing voice actor didn't do them any favors either. Ty Olsson definitely brings a new energy to the role, and while it's far from an unsalvageable performance, it's just different. It's like running into an old friend from high school. You know them, but do you really? He's still the Frank who's covered wars, but he's also someone that seems more interested in taking the perfect selfie, rather than uncovering the truth behind the outbreak. The story kicks off with Frank being dragged out of semi-retirement by one of his students, Vic Chu, who convinces him to investigate a new military base in Willamette. What starts as a standard investigation quickly spirals into another full-blown zombie outbreak, because of course it does. Before long, Frank finds himself back into the thick of things, battling the undead, uncovering a government conspiracy, and dealing with a host of new enemies. We pick up with Frank and Vic driving to Willamette, with the latter tricking Frank into thinking they were going to play minigolf at 8 PM. Minigolf at 8 PM? I know Frank is older in this game, but this is like senile levels of cognitive impairment. After arriving at the base, collecting a keycard, and beating a man to death, we sneak into the compound. Only a few moments later, I fall through the floor however. I suppose this state-of-the-art military facility has the structural integrity of soggy bread. After killing a zombie, finding a weapon, and killing some more zombies, we make it to a high-tech experimentation room where we get our first investigation. These are a new minigame type activity that occurred at set points in the story, during which you'll need to take some photographs of some points of interest. A little later, Frank and Vic come across some lady suffering inside of a cell. Frank urges her to leave it alone, but Vic decides to off the zombie, very loudly. This of course puts the entire base on high alert for intruders. Frank fights his way out of the base, only to find Vic leaving him behind right at the end. You'd think this would have had some long-term ramifications or consequences, but no, Frank just kinda shrugs it off and changes his name to Hank East. Cut to 4 months later, and Frank is teaching journalism somewhere in the Midwest, but he's found and confronted by the new commander of the ZDC, Brad Park. Finally, a character from a good game. Brad informs Frank of the new Willamette outbreak, that it's been going on for 6 weeks, and that Frank's student Vic is already on the case, trying to expose the truth. We fly into Willamette, but as is custom with helicopters in the Dead Rising franchise, we get shot out of the sky and crash into the new Willamette Mall. After dealing with the first horde of zombies, we make our way over to a nearby hotel before dealing with some obscure soldiers. By this point, you might have noticed that all of the zombies look exactly the same. Turns out that this was a cosmetic DLC that is automatically turned on at launch, and not just yet another misguided creative decision. Rest assured, you'll see the sea of green turn into a sea of yellow and red in a bit. Frank makes his way to the mall zombie shelter, and after dealing with the fresh infected, he has a look through Vic's clues to discover what she's found out so far. Frank discovers that the outbreak started at the mall's entrance, so that's where we're headed next. On the way, we make our way through a medieval themed part of the mall and deal with the gang of role players that reside within. I make it to the entrance, investigate a quarantine area before running into a guy called Darcy, who tells us that there's a podcaster that's also been investigating Obscurus. Frank goes to the garage and gets told how to make combo vehicles, and after a little, I make it to City Hall and get acquainted with Paula, the aforementioned podcaster. After another investigation, she tells us that there's an Obscurus sniper camped out nearby. I go over to interrogate him, but find him nailed to a wall instead. How unfortunate. Upon investigating, I discover a panic room and a small mountain of tranquilizer darts. These guys are hunting more than rabbits, that's for sure. I also catch a transmission from some Obscurus goons who are falling back to a nearby fire station. Once I get there, I clear out the zombies and investigate once again. Afterwards, I go to the junkyard, another Obscurus operations base. After sneaking inside, it's revealed that Vic is working with the mercenaries, ratting out survivors in order to further her own interests. After getting caught, we deal with the goons, and Paula tells us that they took Darcy over to Westridge, so we give chase. Frank goes to Westridge, but ends up getting a tranq dart in his neck before waking up in the Resistance fighter base, led by Tom, who is indeed bald. Never trust bald people! He tells us Frank has to help defeat Obscurus, but Frank wants into the dam as a reward, as that's where the clues lead next. I go find Hammond as a favor to Tom, and after saving her and some other guys, she informs us about the service door around the back of the dam, which should let us inside. Frank makes his way over to the dam, and after defeating the Obscurus forces there, discovers that they managed to capture the creature they've been hunting. But it doesn't seem to have gone exactly to plan, as we can find the convoys strewn about the entire town. Once I get to the end of the carnage, I find the sole survivor. After giving him some morphine, I follow the wreckage down a tunnel and into the sewers. After getting down there, I come across the first Evos, who are zombies that have retained some of their intelligence. Frank deals with them before being contacted by Blackburn, the leader commander of Obscurus' research. She tells Frank she can give him vital information if we arrange a helicopter ride out of the city within the next 48 hours. I go to meet her in Westridge, and after dealing with the soldiers keeping her hostage, end up having a run-in with Vic. She scolds us for only being after the truth, and Frank tells her she needs to be able to put her own morals aside. Blackburn tells us that this outbreak is based on research that's 15 years old, all the way back to the original outbreak, which of course is revealed to be none other than Dr. Barnaby, the old guy that died of an aneurysm. She tells us that there's a nearby vineyard that he uses as a front, and for us to investigate the cellar. Hey look, I fix the zombies. Once I get to the winery, I make my way downstairs and investigate Barnaby's lab before getting into the testing chamber. After investigating it, I go to meet up with Hammond again. After finding her, she tells us that Tom has gone off the deep end, seeing himself as judge, jury and executioner. Never trust bald people! She asks us to clear the nearby pool hall so the outcasts of his group have somewhere to stay. After doing so, Frank meets Hammond outside of a military base, and after blowing a hole in the wall, we sabotage some equipment. Once I get into the main facility, I track down the research that Obscurus stole from Barnaby's lab. While doing so, I come across a recording of some Obscurus soldiers finding the lab under the winery. While investigating, however, some of the wasps get loose, and it ends with Calder, an officer, getting trapped inside of the testing chamber with some of the wasps, resulting in the first intelligent zombie. When trying to leave, Frank has a run-in with Fontana, the commander of Obscurus. Before we get to finish her off, we're interrupted by Calder, and Fontana tries to sacrifice herself by blowing them both up. It only results in one casualty, however, as Calder just shrugs it off. Afterwards, Frank escapes the base and has to go help out Hammond at a nearby shelter. After clearing it out, I talk to some of the survivors who tells us that she's been taken by Tom, so we head to his farm. Once I get there, I clear out the enemies and investigate Tom's secret room, before discovering that Tom took Hammond to a nearby cement factory in order to execute her. Frank goes there and fights his way to the top in order to have a showdown with Tom. After killing him, we ask Hammond to help defeat Calder. I head down to the train wreckage again, collect some explosives, and make my way deeper into the sewers. After a little, I come across Calder, communicating with a group of other evos. I collect Barnaby's hard drive, and after escaping from Calder, Frank attempts to transfer the hard drive's contents onto his camera, during which it's revealed that Barnaby was attempting to genetically engineer human immortality. Unfortunately, we get held up by Vic, who takes the camera from us, as she's still on her moral crusade of wanting to do things the right way. We of course give chase after her, and after a little we find her being taken down by Calder, who gives us a speech about how journalists are scum of the earth, only taking but never giving anything back. He might be onto something actually. We then chuck on an exosuit and have a showdown with Calder, who we beat to death for an excruciatingly long amount of time. After defeating him, he lights a blaze. Leon did it better. Then Frank takes Vic back to the safe house, where the duo make up, agreeing to split the article 50-50 after Vic reveals she grabbed the SD card before Calder destroyed the camera, with the bonus of minigolf and a fist bump on top. Afterwards, Frank, Vic and Brad fight their way through the mall and to the rooftop in order to get out of the city via helicopter. However, disaster strikes, as zombies grab onto Frank before he makes it onto the chopper, and he decides to sacrifice himself to save his friends. Vic honors him by publishing a truthful article, exposing the corruption within the government. Now, this was ending... Oh, there's only one ending. This time around, the military is much more heavily involved, and their constant presence adds a new layer of tension to the narrative. The government conspiracy angle is a familiar one for the series, but Dead Rising 4 doesn't quite manage to bring anything new to the table. It's a plot we've seen before, and while it serves as a functional backdrop for the zombie mayhem, it lacks the impact of earlier games. Vic Chu, Frank's protege turned antagonist, is one of the new faces in this installment. She's ambitious, driven, and willing to go to great lengths to get her story, qualities that put her at odds with Frank. Throughout the game, Vic serves as a foil to Frank, representing a new generation of journalists who are more concerned with ethics than sensationalism. It's an interesting dynamic, but one that feels underdeveloped, which isn't that hard, seeing as the main story is only about 8 hours long. Vic's motivations are clear, but her character arc doesn't have the depth needed to make her a truly compelling adversary. A majority of the people you come across in this game are closer to cardboard cutouts rather than actual fucking characters. Half of them don't even have anything to do in the story, just standing around safe houses doing nothing. And the other half serve their purpose in perpetually harassing you over the radio, through dialogue that's delivered with the personality of a hospital brochure, and the enthusiasm of a church service. Hell, Dr. Barnaby is one of the most influential characters in this game, and he's been dead for a fucking decade at this point. This lack of depth makes it hard to invest in the narrative fully, especially when compared to the more fleshed out characters from earlier games. However, I wasn't free of this agonizing experience just yet, as Capcom were kind enough to grace us with 3 DLCs after release. The first one of these was Frank Rising, a story-based DLC that serves as a definitive ending to Dead Rising 4. The main game ends on a semi-cliffhanger, with Frank seemingly meeting his end. However, Capcom doesn't have the guts to kill their face of the franchise, and thus he survives, having been infected with the zombie virus and turning into another intelligent zombie. As the DLC follows his struggle to find a cure before fully succumbing to the infection, the DLC's gameplay is markedly different from the base game. As an infected Frank, players gain new, more zombie-like abilities. He can now feast to regain health, pounce onto distant enemies, and unleash powerful screams to knock over zombies. Frank also has an entirely new skill tree, which does actually change gameplay by giving you new abilities, unlike the main game's one. You can take on challenges in order to unlock new abilities and skills. These range from killing a group of looters or collecting a bunch of pheromones within a set amount of time. You can also get your hands on collectibles, ranging from organ containers to research papers, in order to unlock even more abilities. The DLC starts off with us waking up on the rooftop and getting familiar with our powers by feasting on some survivors as they're occupied trying to deal with hordes of the undead. But after a little, we get mercilessly gunned down by Hammond, who doesn't seem too bothered by the fact that we've been turned into a brainbiter. Blackburn, however, insists that Frank could be the cure to immortality. After getting out of the room, she tells us that the Pentagon knows that Obscure's messed up, and that they're planning to bomb the city. Oh, so now we get a fucking clock. Frank makes his way through the mall, and makes his way to Caller's smoky corpse in order to absorb the swarm inhabiting his body. Afterwards, Frank makes his way around town, collecting painkillers, a control key, solenoids, a bottle of hard liquor, and Blackburn's research notes from a nearby bus depot. I then head to the school in Westridge to take out a pack of Evos to collect their wasps, including a Royal Evo, so I can get my hands on a queen. Frank then heads to Tom's farm in order to meet up with Hammond, but while filling her in on the situation, we get interrupted by Obscurus, having been betrayed by Blackburn as she'd prefer to get the scientific credit for making the superior human, rather than actually curing Frank. After defeating them, Frank heads to the winery and clears out the last of Obscurus' soldiers inside, before making Blackburn cure him by doing a whole bunch of sciencey stuff and coming out as a new man. But it wasn't without sacrifice, as Hammond and the rest of the survivors died protecting the winery, leaving Frank and Blackburn as the only two survivors. Afterwards, Frank retired and disappeared from the public space, never telling the tale of his time as a zombie and plagued by nightmares until his death. Now, this was actually not the best ending, so I played through the whole thing again in order to get a slightly different ending cutscene. The DLC has a darker, more urgent tone to the story, contrasting with the lighter, more humorous aspects of the main game. It also provides some closure to the cliffhanger ending of Dead Rising 4, albeit in a somewhat rushed and not entirely satisfying manner. While Frank Rising was appreciated for its unique take on gameplay and its effort to expand the story, it was criticized for its short length and for the fact that it made the true ending of the game something players had to purchase separately, something that didn't sit well with many fans. Super Ultra Dead Rising 4 Minigolf is exactly what it sounds like, a minigolf game set within the world of Dead Rising. It's bizarre, and it's about as far removed from the main game's tone as you can get. The DLC allows players to play through a series of mini-golf courses scattered throughout Willamette, complete with zombies acting as obstacles. Gameplay is relatively straightforward. You play minigolf, trying to sink your ball in as few strokes as possible while navigating a variety of zombie-infested courses. Each course is filled with environmental hazards, undead enemies, and of course, power-ups that allow you to spice up your game. Players earn Zenny while playing, which they can use to unlock and customize various aspects of their character, ranging from clubs to balls. I found it enjoyable for about 5 minutes, as does the majority of other players, judging by the achievement unlock rate. And lastly, Capcom Heroes was a free update for Dead Rising 4. It's a DLC that reimagines Dead Rising 4 in a new light. The DLC allows players to replay the base game story with a twist. Frank can now don various outfits that transform him into famous characters from Capcom's expansive catalog of games. Each outfit grants Frank special abilities inspired by the character he's dressed as. Ryu from Street Fighter can perform Hadoukens, while Mega Man X lets you use the Mega Buster. Capcom Heroes was generally well received for its fun and lighthearted approach. It's a love letter to Capcom fans, packed with references and Easter eggs that reward players familiar with the company's history. Though I'll be honest, I didn't keep playing once I realized that this was just a base game with some power-ups tacked on. Regardless, it's a great example of a DLC that doesn't take itself too serious, instead focus on delivering pure, unadulterated fun. When Dead Rising 4 hit the shelves in December of 2016, it was met with a mixture of indifference and skepticism. The return of Frank West, the iconic setting of Willamette, and the promise of holiday-themed carnage were all tantalizing prospects for long-term fans of the series. But as the dust settled and the initial excitement wore off, it became clear that Dead Rising 4 was not the triumphant return that many had hoped for. The fan reaction was as mixed as a zombie horde. Some embraced the changes, while others felt the game had taken a wrong turn at the North Pole. One of Dead Rising 4's biggest challenges was trying to appeal to two very differing audiences. the die-hard fans who had stuck with the series since its inception, and the new players who were just being introduced to it. Capcom attempted to make the game more accessible to a broader audience, but in doing so, they made some changes that didn't sit too well with veterans. For longtime fans, the removal of the timer was a particularly bitter pill to swallow, as it had been a cornerstone of the Dead Rising experience, creating a sense of tension and urgency that made every decision feel meaningful. Its absence was seen as a betrayal of the series' roots by many fans. Additionally, the game's focus on particularly mindless action, simplified combat, toned down difficulty, and the lack of real psychopaths all contributed to the feeling that this entry had strayed too far from what made the earlier games so memorable. On the other hand, new players found themselves having fun with a more accessible entry point into the series. The removal of the timer, controversial as it may be, made the game more approachable, allowing them to explore Willamette at their own pace without the constant pressure of the clock. The game's critical reception mirrored the fan reaction quite well, lukewarm to say the least. Most outlets and other creators criticized the game's lack of timer, challenge, and simplified gameplay, all being seen as steps backward for the series. I know that hindsight is 2020, but the outlets that gave this game an 8 or 9 out of 10 must have been blinder than Stevie Wonder. Looking back, it's clear that Dead Rising 4 tried to strike a balance between old and new, but didn't quite succeed in pleasing either side. The changes to core gameplay elements, while intended to make the game more accessible, ended up alienating a significant portion of the fanbase. Reflecting on Dead Rising 4, it's clear that the game represented a turning point in the series, a moment where the franchise attempted to reinvent itself for a new generation of players while trying to stay true to the spirit that made it a cult classic. The result, however, was a game that left fans divided and critics lukewarm, a festive experiment that dared to be different but didn't quite manage to capture the magic of its predecessors. The decision to recast Frank with a new voice actor and give him a more comedic, self-aware personality was a bold move, but it also alienated many longtime fans. This new Frank was starkier, more meta, and more focused on taking selfies with zombies than uncovering the truth behind the outbreak. Frank's return to Willamette, the setting of the original Dead Rising, was meant to evoke nostalgia and bring the series full circle, but the Frank we got in Dead Rising 4 wasn't the same Frank that fans had come to love. Frank's transformation is emblematic of the broader changes in Dead Rising 4, a game that tried to modernize the franchise by embracing more casual, action-oriented gameplay and a lighter tone. In doing so, it left behind some of the elements that had made the earlier games so unique: the tension of the timer, the complexity of research management, and the dark, often tragic humor that ran through the series. The decision to set Dead Rising 4 during Christmas was another bold choice that set the game apart from its predecessors. The holiday theme gave the game a unique visual identity, with its festive decorations, holiday music, and Christmas-themed weapons adding a layer of dark humor to the zombie carnage. But the holiday setting also contributed to the game's tonal inconsistency. The festive atmosphere, while fun and visually striking, clashed with the darker elements of the story. The result was a game that at times felt like it was unsure of what it wanted to be: a horror game with holiday cheer, or a holiday game with a side of horror. Additionally, every radio song inside of the game's vehicles was Christmas themed, which just led to me muting the game entirely while I was grabbing some footage post-story. It's clear that Dead Rising 4 was a game that tried to do too many things. It was a game that attempted to modernize the Dead Rising formula for a new audience while retaining the elements that had made the series a success in the first place. But in trying to please everybody, they ended up pleasing nobody. As the last main entry in the series, Dead Rising 4 left fans of the franchise with a bad taste in their mouth. The game's mixed reception and the closure of Capcom Vancouver in 2018 have cast doubt on the future of the series, until now at least. So, as we close the book on Dead Rising 4, let's raise a glass of spiked eggnog to Frank West and the merry mess he made in Willamette. Here's hoping that, whatever the future holds for the series, it finds a way to recapture the magic that made Dead Rising a cult classic. 4 exosuits out of 10. Hey there, thanks for watching till the end of this supercut of the Dead Rising series. While these are all games that I covered individually in the past, I decided to throw them into a single video for everyone that may not have seen them, or just prefers longer videos on the whole. If you enjoyed, leave a like, a comment, and subscribe, as I have about 300 more reviews to make between now and the inevitable heat death of the universe. Follow me on Twitter and join the Discord. I've been Synthwave, and I'll be back at more videos real soon.